is unlawful, and Israel has an obligation to end it as rapidly as possible. The General Assembly demanded that Israel should comply. Meanwhile, the Israeli authorities continue to limit and prevent the international media from reporting from the occupied Palestinian territory. International media outlets are the eyes and ears of the world. Journalists must be able to do their jobs everywhere. Mr. President, shock waves radiating from the unprecedented death and destruction in Gaza now threaten to push the entire region into the abyss, a full-scale conflagration with unimaginable consequences. Monday was the bloodiest day in Lebanon since 2006. Today, Israeli Defense Forces struck civilian buildings in Beirut, saying they had targeted Hezbollah's main headquarters located under Nice. War in Lebanon could lead to further escalation involving outside powers. I fully support the proposal for a temporary ceasefire, allowing for the delivery of humanitarian relief and paving the way for the resumption of serious negotiations for a durable peace across the Blue Line. We need this ceasefire now. We cannot afford endless negotiations as we have on Gaza. We must avoid a regional war at all costs. Gaza remains the epicenter of the violence, and Gaza is key to ending it. Mr. President, Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world for the delivery of humanitarian assistance. But our colleagues continue to do their utmost to fulfill their humanitarian mission. The recent polio vaccination campaign shows what humanitarian agencies can do when they are allowed to carry out their vital work. But crossing points into Gaza remain restricted or inaccessible, roads are damaged and littered with unexploded ordnance, essential items, including shelter kits and protective equipment, are prohibited, and so far this month, almost half of coordinated humanitarian movements in Gaza were denied access or otherwise impeded by the Israeli authorities. 87% of movements between north and south were denied or impeded. Instead of scaling up humanitarian operations, we see a scaling up of attacks and harassment against humanitarian personnel. On 28 August, Israeli forces opened fire on a clearly marked World Food Programme armored vehicle that was part of a convoy that had been coordinated with the Israeli military authorities. 10 bullets hit the windows of the vehicle. On 9 September, a UN convoy that had been fully coordinated with the Israeli forces was stopped at Al-Rashid checkpoint on its way to support the polio vaccination campaign in northern Gaza. Soldiers pointed their weapons directly at the convoy personnel. The clearly marked UN vehicles were encircled by Israeli forces and live shots were fired. The convoy was approached by 2 Israeli tanks and a bulldozer. The rear tank rammed UN vehicles from the back, compacting the convoy with 12 humanitarian workers inside. The bulldozer dropped debris on the first vehicle, while soldiers threatened UN and NGO personnel inside. Actions like these create significant risks to UN and other humanitarian personnel. Attacks on humanitarians are an unacceptable assault on the values of the United Nations and must stop. Meanwhile, the indispensable work of UNRWA cannot be undermined by attacks against its people and mandate and by administrative obstacles. I urge the Israeli authorities to do everything in their power to end attacks on UN personnel and property, to stop spreading disinformation against UN officials and entities, and to speed up the approval of visas and procurement requests. All parties must abide by their obligations to protect humanitarian personnel and ensure that civilian sites are not used for military purposes. Mr. President, The United Nations will continue to support all efforts towards sustainable peace, starting with an end to the violence. The death spiral must end for Gaza, for the people of Palestine and Israel, for the region and for the world. International humanitarian law must be respected. Civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected. Aid must flow freely and safely, and there must finally be accountability. The key to peace in the region is a political solution. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally, and the international community must mobilize for an immediate ceasefire and the beginning of an irreversible process towards the end of the occupation and the creation of a Palestinian state. I urge the Council to unite in support of an immediate ceasefire leading to a viable two-state solution. That is the only way to end this cycle of tragedy, and I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. And now I give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mohammed Mustafa, Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Observer State of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President. اسمح لي في البداية
At the outset,
أن أتقدم منكم
allow me
ولوفد سلوفينيا
to
بصفتكم رئيس مجلس الأمن لهذا
thank
الشهر
you, Mr. President, and thank
بوافر
Slovenia,
الشكر
the
والتقدير
President of the Security
على
Council,
عقد
for
هذا
this
الاجتماع
month.
الوزاري الهام
We express our
حول القضية
gratitude for
الفلسطينية.
holding this important
وأود
ministerial
أن أغتنم
meeting
هذه الفرصة
on the Palestinian cause.
لأتقدم
I
لكم
take this
بالتهنئة على حسن
opportunity to
قيادتكم
congratulate you
لمجلس الأمن
on
خلال
assuming
فترة
the
توليكم الرئاسة
presidency
خاصة
of the Security
في
Council
هذا
in
الوقت
this
الدقيق.
able manner, especially
لقد
at
شهدنا
this
من
delicate
سلوفينيا
time.
مواقف مشرفة
Slovenia has had
الوقوف إلى جانب
honorable
القانون
positions.
الدولي
You stood
والحقوق التي
beside
يكفلها هذا
international
القانون
law and the rights
ولكم منا
guaranteed by
كل
this law.
الاحترام
We
والثناء.
express all our gratitude
كما
and our
أود أيضا
respect to you.
أن أتقدم بالشكر والتقدير
We would also like to
للأمين العام
express
للأمم
our
المتحدة
thanks and appreciation to
على
the Secretary
قيادته
General
الحكيمة
of the United Nations
لمنظمتنا
for his wise
التي
leadership
تتعرض لهجوم
of this
وحملات
organization
تشهير
that has been the
غير
victim
مسبوقة
of attacks
على يد
and
إسرائيل.
defamation, unprecedented
نجد امتنانا
defamation
لكم
by Israel.
نجدد امتنانا
We
لكم
renew
على
our
شجاعتكم
gratitude towards
وحرصكم
you for your
على
courage,
الحفاظ على مصداقية
for
هذه
maintaining
المنظمة
the
وفاعلية
credibility of
عملها
this organization
والاستمرار في
and the
تقديم العون
effectiveness
والإغاثة
of its work
وحشد الدعم
for
لرفع
continuing to
المعاناة
provide
عن شعبنا
assistance,
الفلسطيني
for mobilizing
رغم
support
تكلفكم
to alleviate the
عناء
suffering of
هذه
the
المهمة
Palestinian people.
والمسؤولية ورغم فقدانكم لزملائكم
Although you
في قطاع
yourselves
غزة
have lost
الذين هم
colleagues
إخوتنا
in the Gaza Strip,
وأخواتنا ورغم استهداف
colleagues that
إسرائيل
are
للأمم
our own
المتحدة
brothers and
ومقارها
sisters,
وأماكن
and although
اللواء
Israel targeted the
وموظفيها
United Nations,
خاصة وكالة الأونروا
its
لكم
facilities,
منا
its
كل
shelters,
التحية
its
والاحترام
employees, especially
والدعم.
UNRWA, we
السيد
salute you
الرئيس
and we salute your
أصحاب
sacrifice.
السمو والمعالي
Mr. President,
والسعادة
Your
لقد
Excellencies,
مضى عام كامل على العدوان
a
الإسرائيلي
whole year
على
has
شعبنا
passed
في قطاع
since the
غزة
beginning
المحاصر
of the Israeli
والمدمر
aggression against our people in the Gaza Strip.
360
The
يوما
Gaza
وليلة
Strip that has been destroyed
الرعب
and sieged,
والقتل
365
والنزوح
days and nights of
والدمار
terror, of killing,
والمرض
of displacement,
والألم
of destruction,
والجوع
of disease,
والقهر
of pain, of
واليأس
hunger, of
والحزن
despair, of
والحاجة
sadness, of
والحرمان
need, of deprivation.
وفوق هذا التجريد
And on top
وفوق هذا وذاك
of all of that,
التجريد من الإنسانية
they've dehumanized
والكرامة.
us and they took away our dignity.
لقد بدأ عام على تعنت
year has
الحكومة
passed
الإسرائيلية
On the
ولقد مضى عام
intransigence
أيضا
of the Israeli
على
government. A
الازدواجية
year has
اللا
passed
إنسانية
for
للمعايير
the inhumane
المجلس.
double standards in this council.
والتي تركت أطفالنا
Double
ونساؤنا
standards that have left
وشيوخنا
our
ورجالنا
children, our women, our
وأطباؤنا
elderly, our
وصحفيين
doctors, our journalists,
ومعلمينا
our teachers,
وطواقمنا دون حماية
our humanitarian
وعون.
workers, without any
وكأنهم
protection,
ليسوا من البشر.
without any support, as if they were not even
السيد الرئيس،
human beings.
لقد أتينا إلى الأمم المتحدة
Mr. President, we
ولمسنا
came
التضامن
to the
الكبير
United Nations
مع
and
شعبنا
we felt
وقضيته العادلة،
solidarity, great solidarity
ولكننا
with our
نغادرها
people and our
والمجازر
just
الإسرائيلية
cause. But we
لم
leave the
تتوقف
United
بعد.
Nations and we see that the Israeli
ومجلس
massacres
الأمن
have not
لم
ended.
يلجم
And the
حتى
Security
الآن
Council, to this
العدوان
very
الإسرائيلي،
day, did
ولم
not put an end to
يقر
the Israeli
الإجراءات التي من
aggression,
شأنها
did not adopt
كبح جماح
measures
الحكومة الإسرائيلية
that would
التي ترى في الحرب والعدوان
put pressure to bear on the Israeli
استراتيجية سياسية
government
للبقاء في
to put an
الحكم.
end to this war, to this
فبعد أن
aggression.
دمرت كل غزة
They've
بالكامل
destroyed Gaza
واجتاحت مدن الضفة
completely.
الغربية ونكلت
They've
في شعبنا
invaded
الفلسطيني الأعزل،
cities in the West
نراها
Bank.
اليوم تفتح نيرانها على الشعب
They've
اللبناني
attacked
الشقيق
unarmed Palestinian citizens,
وتستبيح
and
سيادة
today
لبنان
we see them firing on the
في
Lebanese
خرق
people.
صارخ
They're
بميثاق
violating
الأمم
the sovereignty
المتحدة
of
والقوانين
Lebanon,
الدولية،
blatantly violating
تتصرف
the UN
كدولة
Charter
خارجة عن
and
القانون
international law. They are
لأنها
acting as a
مقتنعة
rogue state
لأنها دولة
because
فوق
they are
القانون
convinced that they are above the
يحق لها
law
ما لا يحق
and
لغيرها.
they are entitled to things that other
وكيف لا
countries are
تكرر
not
إسرائيل
entitled
المشهد
to.
العدواني
So
في
how would they
لبنان
not repeat the
طالما أنها
same
لم
aggression
تعاقب
in
على
Lebanon
جرائمها في
if they were not
فلسطين
held accountable for their crimes in
ولم
Palestine
يفرض عليها الانصياع
and that they were
للمطالب
not
بوقف إطلاق النار
forced
في غزة
to comply
ووقف سياسة
with the
العدوان
ceasefire in
وردع
Gaza,
إرهاب المستوطنين في
with
الضفة
putting an
الغربية
end to the
بما فيها
aggression,
القدس.
with putting an end to the terror
السيد الرئيس،
from
إن
settlers in the
إسرائيل
West Bank,
مستمرة
including
في
East
مخططها
Jerusalem.
العدواني
Israel
حتى تجر
continues with
المنطقة
its
بكاملها
aggression
نحو
so
حرب
that it
مفتوحة.
pushes the entire region
هل
towards an
سيستمر مجلس
open
الأمن
war?
في
Will
موقفه
the Security
التقليدي
Council
الذي ينتهي
continue
بالتنديد
with its
والمطالبة
traditional position where you
وتوقع من
call
إسرائيل
for
الامتثال؟
Israel to put an end to the
متى
war and expect
ستفعلون
Israel to
أدواتكم هنا
comply?
في
When
مجلس
will you
الأمن
activate your tools
التي
at
تجبر
the Security
إسرائيل
Council
على
that will
الامتثال
compel
لصون
Israel
وحفظ
to
الأمن
comply,
والسلم
to
الدوليين؟
maintain international peace
إلى
and
متى
security?
سيكون الفصل السابع
Till
محرما
when
على
will
إسرائيل؟
you
هل تنتظرون
refrain
كارثة
from
أكبر
using
من
Chapter
ذلك؟
7 on Israel?
هل
Are you
تنتظرون
waiting for a
حربا
bigger
أوسع من
catastrophe?
ذلك؟
Are you waiting for a larger
نحن
war?
ندين استهداف المدنيين
We condemn
كافة
attacking
وعلى السواء
citizens
مهما كان عرقهم أو
regardless
جنسيتهم
of their
أو دينهم.
nationality, their
فلا
religion,
يوجد
their
مبرر
background.
يسمح
There is
أو
no
يعطي أحدا
justification that gives
ترخيصا
anyone
لاستهداف
the
المدنيين
right to
وإيقاع
target
الأذى بهم.
civilians and to harm
السيد
civilians.
الرئيس، أصحاب السمو
Mr.
والمعالي
President,
والسعادة،
Your Excellencies,
لعل ما يمكن استخلاصه
maybe
فيما يخص
what we
القضية
can conclude
الفلسطينية
when it
خلال
comes to
هذا
the
الأسبوع
Palestinian cause during
من
this week
الوقت الذي قضيناه في الأمم المتحدة
at the United
هو أن
Nations
قادة
is
العالم
that
من مختلف
leaders
بقاع
of the
الأرض
world
يرون أنه من اللا
from different
منطقي
countries,
بل من
they
الجنون
see that it is
أن نستمر على
unreasonable,
نفس
it is
النهج
insane
الذي اعتدنا
to
عليه في
maintain the
الماضي
same approach that we
لمواجهة
have
التحديات
adopted in the
المهولة
past
التي
to
نقف
confront
أمامها
the
اليوم
great challenges before
والتي
us
تمنعنا
today
من تحقيق
that
السلام
prevent
العادل
us from
والشامل
achieving a just,
والدائم،
comprehensive and
ما
lasting
يعني
peace.
أيضا أنه من
This
غير
also
الممكن
means
الاكتفاء
it is
فقط
not
بالتعبير
possible to
والانضمام
simply
إلى الموقف الدولي الثابت
express and
بشأن
join
التسوية
the
السلمية
constant
للقضية الفلسطينية
international
ثم
position
ترك
on
الأمور
the
إلى أن
peaceful
يأتي الوقت
settlement of the
الذي
Palestinian
تصبح
cause, and
هذه
then leave
الأطراف
things as they are
جاهزة
up
للتفاوض من
until
أجل
the moment
التوصل
when
إلى حل
all
عادل
parties are ready to
وسلمي
negotiate to
وشامل.
reach
فلا
this
يمكن
just,
الآن
peaceful
تجاهل
and
الحقيقة أن
comprehensive
هناك
solution.
طرف
We cannot ignore
لا
the fact
يريد
that there is a
التفاوض
party that does not wish to
ولكنه
negotiate,
من يملك الوقت
even
كله
though this party has all the time in
ويفرض
the world,
الحقائق غير
is
الشرعية
imposing
على الأرض
illegitimate facts
وفق
on the
أجندته
ground.
السياسية
They have their own
الداخلية
internal political
والاستعمارية
agenda,
المنافية
a
للقانون
colonial
الدولي
agenda
وميثاق
that
الأمم
violates
المتحدة.
international law and the UN
وهناك
Charter,
طرف يسابق الزمن
while the other
يفقد في
party
كل
is
يوم
racing against
ما
time,
هو أغلى
and every day
وأثمن
is losing
وما لا
everything
يمكن
that
تعويضه
is near and dear,
واستعادته
something that
كما
we
لا
cannot
يمكن بعد اليوم
compensate, that we cannot
التصديق
get
بأن إدارة
back.
الصراع
We cannot
بدلا
really
من
believe
إنهائه
after
هي
today
استراتيجية
that
مجدية
managing the
تصل
conflict
بنا
instead of
إلى
ending
الأمن
the conflict
والاستقرار.
is a good
إن
strategy
المواقف
that will
الدولية
lead to
الثابتة
security and
بشأن
stability.
التسوية السلمية للقضية الفلسطينية
Constant
هي
international
مواقف
positions
ضرورية
on the
وهامة
peaceful
جدا
settlement of the
وقد
Palestinian
سعينا
cause.
معكم
These are
بشكل
necessary and
جماعي
important
للتوصل
positions,
إليها
and we
على
have
مر
worked with
العقود
you so that we can
لتصبح
reach this
مرجعيات
peaceful
دولية
settlement for
متفق
decades, so
عليها
that we can go
وتستند
back
إلى
to the
القانون الدولي
internationally
وقرارات
agreed
الشرعية
upon terms of
الدولية.
references, so
ولكننا
that we can
نقف
rely on
الآن
international law
أمام
and the
تحديات
resolutions of
عظيمة
international
ومنعطف
legitimacy. But
تاريخي
today we are
لم
before
تعد
great
هذه
challenges.
المواقف
We are
وحدها
before a
كافية
turning point, and
وأصبح من
these
الملح
positions
أن
alone are
تتكاتف
not
الجهود
enough.
لاتخاذ
need
إجراءات
concerted
عملية
efforts to take
تجعل من إنهاء
practical
الاحتلال
measures that
وتنفيذ
make
حل الدولتين
the
على
end of
حدود
the occupation and
1967
achieving the two-state
حقيقة
solution
وتمارس
along the borders
على
of
الأرض
1967
الواقعية. لا
to
يمكن
make sure that
إبطالها
this is a
أو
reality
التراجع
on the
عنها،
ground.
ولا يمكن الإبقاء
It is
عليها كمجرد
irreversible.
رؤية
It
سياسية
cannot
أو
remain
أمنية دولية.
as a political
السيد
vision.
الرئيس، مع ظهور جيل فلسطيني جديد
Mr. President,
تتعمد
we have a new
إسرائيل سلطة
Palestinian
الاحتلال غير
generation,
الشرعي
and
تدمير
Israel, the
فلسطين،
occupying power,
ثم
is
نعيد
seeking
بناؤها،
to destroy
ثم تدمرها
Palestine.
مرة
We
أخرى،
rebuild again,
ونعيد
they destroy
بناؤها
again, we
مرة
rebuild again,
أخرى، ثم
and
تدمر
they
مرة
destroy
أخرى.
again.
لقد مررنا بمحن
We
ومآس
have
شتى،
witnessed
ونهض
many
شعبنا
tragedies,
بعد كل
and
محنة
our people
ململما
managed
جراحه،
to stand up
حاملا
once again
ألمه،
after each
وحافظا أمله،
tragedy,
مصمما على الحياة،
holding on
مستحقا
to their
لدعمكم
hope, holding
وتضامنكم
on to
ومؤازرتكم
life,
ومساندتكم
relying on
التي
your
تقدمون.
support, on your
في كل مرة
solidarity, and on
آلة
your
البناء
help.
والتطوير
Every
الفلسطينية
time
تقابل
the
بآلة
destruction
التدمير والهدم
machine
الإسرائيلية.
of
نحن وأنتم
Israel
نبني،
is
وإسرائيل
faced with the
تدمر.
development machine of
نبني
Palestine.
المدرسة
Israel
والإنسان،
destroys
وإسرائيل
and we
تهدم
rebuild.
المدرسة
Israel
وتهدم الإنسان.
destroys schools
نريد
and
إعادة بناء
human beings,
فلسطين
and we rebuild
بشكل
these schools,
يضمن ألا تتعرض
and we
للتدمير مرة
rebuild
أخرى،
Palestine, and we
ولا
need to
يجبر
rebuild it
شعبنا
in a
على
way
النزوح
that makes
قسرا
sure that it is
مرة
not
أخرى،
destroyed again,
وألا يقف على
so that
أبوابكم
our people are
مكلوما
not displaced
مرة
once again,
أخرى.
so that they do not
نريد أن نعيد
stand
بناء
by your
فلسطين،
doors
ونحن على يقين
facing
بأن
calamity
الطريق
once again. We
الذي
want to
ينتظرها
rebuild
هو
Palestine
الطريق الذي
while we are
يقودها
sure
نحو
that
الأمام،
the path
نحو
we are
الازدهار.
taking is
يعيش
the path
شعبنا فيها
towards the
بكرامة
future
كدولة ذات
prosperity,
سيادة
where our
بين
people
الدول،
can live in
وكأمة
dignity
حرة
as a sovereign
بين الأمم.
state among
نريد
nations.
الانعتاق من الاحتلال
We
الإسرائيلي
want to
غير
break
القانوني
free from the
وفق
illegal Israeli
فتوى محكمة
occupation
العدل الدولية
according to the
دون أي
advisory
تأخير.
opinion of the
نريد دولتنا
ICJ without any
المستقلة
delay. We
وعاصمتها
want
القدس
our
الشرقية
independent state
حرة
with East
ذات
Jerusalem as
سيادة.
its
نريد
capital,
لشعبنا أن
a
يعيش على
free
أرضه
sovereign state. We want our
ينعم
people
فيها
to live on
بالحرية
their land
والكرامة
where they
كما
are
يكفل له
enjoying freedom and
وحق
dignity
المشروع في تقرير
according
المصير
to their
دون أي
legitimate
تأجيل.
right to
فنحن لدينا
self-determination without
المكونات
delay.
اللازمة،
We have the
لدينا
right
التاريخ
components. We have the
والإرث
history,
والحضارة،
the
لدينا
culture,
التجربة
the
والخبرة
civilization, the
والكفاءة،
experience,
ولدينا
the
القدرة
capability,
والإرادة،
and the
والأهم من
will.
ذلك
And most
لدينا
importantly, we
الإنسان
have
الفلسطيني
the Palestinian
المثابر
people that
والقادر،
is
هو
resistant.
ذخيرتنا وموردنا
They are
الذي
our
لا
human
ينضب.
resources.
اسمح لي سيد الرئيس
Allow me,
أن
Mr. President,
ألقي بقية كلمتي باللغة الإنجليزية
to continue in
حتى
English
أوضح بعض الأفكار
so
بشكل
that I
واضح.
can clarify some
Mr.
of my
President,
messages.
we came here with a simple message. No complicity and no complacency. No bias and no double standards. No excuses and no self-inflicted powerlessness. The rule of international law for the benefit of all. No country above the law. No people denied the protection of the law. No weapons to kill us. No trade with settlements and their associated regime to rob up our land and resources. Hold Israel accountable rather than shield it while it continues committing its crimes. Israel has a plan. It's not hiding it. Get rid of the Palestinian people and grab their land. We need an international plan with the necessary measures to change the reality on the ground. Our call is clear. 1, recognize the state of Palestine and support its membership to the United Nations. Number 2, implement the ICJ advisory opinion and the General Assembly resolution endorsing it and demanding an end to the Israeli unlawful presence in the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territory within 12 months. Number 3, join the global alliance unveiled yesterday to end the occupation and achieve the independence of the state of Palestine and implement the two-state solution. Number 4, support our national plan, Build Palestine, including to build our economy and consolidate our institutions. End impunity and the Israeli occupation will end. End the Israeli occupation and we will achieve shared peace and security. A free Palestine is the sole key that can unlock a peaceful future for our region and unleash its potential. Everything else has been tried and failed, and the cost of this failure is measured in human lives, all too often in Palestinian lives. A different future is possible. It starts with the decisions each state will make today. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Mustafa, for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, we cannot overlook Hezbollah's recent actions. Since October 8, Hezbollah has launched over 9,000 rockets, more than 1,000 anti-tank missiles, and hundreds of explosive UAVs at Israeli civilians. While we are interested in a diplomatic solution, we will take all necessary measures to ensure the safe return of the 70,000 internal refugees to their homes. It is time to hold Iran and its proxy accountable and take decisive action. Esteemed colleagues, this is now our 5th meeting in the span of just 12 days. How long will we repeat these debates? It is time for this Council to break free from this gridlock and regain a semblance of productivity. We sit here today just 10 days from 1-year commemoration of the October 7th massacre, a day forever etched in the hearts of every Israeli. Over 1,200 innocent lives were brutally taken in a single day. People were torn from their homes, bound and burned alive in their final moments. More than 100 hostages remain in Hamas's grasp, enduring unimaginable cruelty. Recently, the bodies of 6 hostages were found brutally murdered just before rescue. The conditions they endured, starvation, suffocation, and deprivation, is a testimony to Hamas's cruelty. This must be a wake-up call to the international community. Condemn Hamas and demand the immediate release of all hostages. That moment was the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. It was a defining moment, not just for us, our leaders and people, but also for the Palestinian people and leadership. That moment of October 7th. They stood at a crossroads and were faced with a choice: to stand with humanity and peace or align with barbarism and terror. In that crucial moment, after we got the news of the attack, the Palestinian Authority failed, exposing their lack of will, desire, and ability to be true partner for peace. Their failure has deepened doubt among many Israelis about the possibility of a peaceful future. Prime Minister Mustafa left, but I plan to ask him, how can you stay silent? How can you, as a proud representative of your people, remain speechless in the face of such barbarity? Why do you refuse to condemn Hamas and their atrocities? I listened very carefully to what he said. Never once he mentioned Hamas. Yesterday I listened to President Abbas in the General Assembly. For half an hour he spoke. Never once mentioned Hamas. The PA was presented with a clear opportunity to distinguish itself from Hamas and their brutality. But once again, they wasted it. They could have presented themselves to the world as a moderate, reasonable body seeking a peaceful future. However, the Palestinian Authority has no interest in that future. The late Abba Eben's word still ring true. He was Israeli PR here many years ago. And he said, and I quote, "The Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity." Instead of standing for peace, the PA used international diplomacy to shield Hamas. We saw it in the General Assembly. We see it every day here. Instead of confronting Hamas, the PA protected them. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority's failing ran even deeper. Not only have they failed to condemn terror, but they have encouraged it through words and policy. Through the vile policy of pay to slay, the PA has turned the murder of innocents into a profitable enterprise. Terrorists are rewarded. and their families compensated. The PA has transformed innocent Israeli blood into a form of sick currency. This is not just a betrayal of Israelis. It is a betrayal of the Palestinian people whose future is being sold off for violence. And I want to ask the distinguished minister and the Prime Minister, your government's collaboration in this violence has prolonged the conflict you claim to want to resolve. You shelter terrorists rather than condemn them. And we speak about Gaza and about the future of Gaza. And how do you expect to be part of a functional and cooperative future for Gaza when you cannot even maintain control over the areas you govern now? Look at the cities in Judea and Samaria, like Jenin and Tulkarem, which are just short rides from Ramallah, the center of the Palestinian Authority. You know as well as I do that Mr. Mustafa and Mr. Abbas and maybe Mr. Mansour, they cannot enter these areas, not anymore. They cannot go to Jenin, to Tulkarem. Your security forces refuse to confront the radical armed terrorists who are quickly seizing control. You have given over these cities and many more into the ruling hands of terrorist monsters. How can you expect to govern Gaza when you have allowed terrorist strongholds to flourish in your backyard? The international community must ask itself, how can the PA possibly be trusted with Gaza's future? Let me be clear. Israel will not stand by as terror spreads. There will be no safe haven for terrorists in Judea and Samaria or Gaza. The IDF is operating wherever necessary, focusing on areas like North Samaria, from where terrorists launch many of their attacks. Everyone here must remember, these operations would not be necessary if the Palestinian Authority met their obligations. They are both incapable and unwilling to do so. Instead of rooting out terrorism, they allow it to fester, leaving Israel no choice but to act. And that's what we do. And we have a mission to eliminate terror wherever it arises, in Beirut, in Jenin, in Gaza, and we will not stop until our citizens are safe. Distinguished colleagues, while Israel fights a war it did not seek, we have made every effort to protect Gaza's civilian population. Despite relentless attacks, we have ensured that humanitarian aid continues to flow. Well over 1 million tons of aid have entered the Strip via over 50,000 trucks. Of the more than 1 million tons of aid, over 800,000 tons have been food. We stand ready to continue to facilitate the entry of aid, and we will continue to go above and beyond our international obligations, even as Hamas continues to embed itself among civilians. These are not actions of a nation seeking destruction. As the Palestinian Authority and their allies would have you believe, and you're going to hear many ministers today, these are the actions of a nation that values life, fighting an enemy that worships death above all else. Yet the PA remains silent on these facts, choosing instead to distort reality to further their political agenda. It is time for the international community to regain its moral clarity. And you know, we see it all over, around the world. We see a clear divide between those who seek peace and those who thrive on chaos and violence. Do not waver. Do not hesitate. There is a distinction between good and evil. In each of your countries, you face radical forces, criminals, extremists, and law-abiding citizens who simply want to live in peace. The question we must ask ourselves today is this: which path is the Palestinian Authority choosing? They have to decide. They want to follow Hamas or to be something else. The PA must be forced to condemn terrorism, to renounce Hamas, and to change the radical positions that fuel this cycle of violence. They must realize there is no future in terrorism and that peace requires courage, not weakness. But whether or not the international community finds the strength to act, Israel will not waver. We will continue to defend our people, protect our borders, and uphold the values of peace and justice. Our resolve is unbreakable, our mission is clear, and we will prevail.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Prime Minister of the Republic of Slovenia. I want to start by thanking the Secretary General for his briefing and recognize a number of high-level participants at this meeting. Excellencies, after this week's debate on leadership for peace, I'm convinced that making a daily choice for peace is also a sign of courage. To ensure peace in the region, we must make tangible and bold steps to protect the two-state solution. I'm not talking about an empty slogan. We need courage from leaders in the region and from this Council to change the trajectory we are facing. Facts on the ground are making the prospects for a two-state solution almost non-existent. Firstly, I agree we can no longer stand idle. Every single leader must contribute. It has been almost a year of the war in Gaza, a year of hostages kept in the tunnels, a year which brought suffering, killing, and destruction. And this is in addition to decades of suffering, killing, and destruction of the entire occupied Palestinian territory. Many of us around the table have stepped up our efforts to ensure humanitarian assistance and contribution to different organizations, provided glimpses of humanity to the people in Gaza, including UNRWA. Merely humanitarian efforts are not enough. We need concrete political signs. Slovenia recognized State of Palestine this June, and I call on the others to do the same. The recognition of Palestine is an extremely important political sign and a message of encouragement for the Palestinians in their struggle for statehood. We must support initiatives empowering the Palestinian Authority government to take control over the entire Palestinian state and regain trust of the Palestinian people. Secondly, we must work together. This Council has adopted numerous resolutions on this conflict, including 4 on this war. ICJ has been clear in its provisional measures and its latest advisory opinion. Occupation must end. Practices and policies such as illegal settlements, settler violence, and human rights violations must end. This Council must be united and adamantly clear in its call for immediate implementation of its resolutions and decisions of ICJ. There should be no double standards and selectivity. If only one of us is not protected by the international law, none of us can no longer rely on it. Thirdly, we must act to prevent peace in the region slipping away. We can no longer express our concern about the potential regional spillover. However, the spiral of violence has gradually become more complex. This week, and in the last days, we have seen an enormous escalation in Lebanon. Attacks must cease. We call for restraint of all actors and respect of international law. The Council must clearly respond to this threat to international peace and security. We cannot let another Gaza happen. Lebanon is a further sign that we urgently need to deliver on the ceasefire deal. Fourth, we must not forget about the West Bank and East Jerusalem. As the world focuses on Gaza, the situation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem has reached a boiling point. Israeli dehumanization of Palestinians has reached a new height. the number of Palestinian children in the West Bank alone who have been killed by Israeli forces nearly tripled in a year. Death toll in the West Bank since October 7 is the highest in the last 15 years. There is a dramatic increase in the intensity of settlement expansion, which involves numerous human rights violations. Excellencies, standing for peace cannot be in the form of hatred, escalation, provocation, occupation, or terrorism. Standing for peace is through normalization of ties, negotiation in good faith, equality, and respect for international law. Only a just solution of two states, Israel and Palestine, side by side in peace and security, can turn a new page for the security and prosperity of the region. And what is this Council doing? Definitely not enough. I have therefore instructed our ambassador to the Security Council, to the United Nations, to start consultations on a possible new humanitarian resolution on Palestine. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Wang Yi, Member of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General,
中方
colleagues,
欢迎阿拉伯国家提议
China
召开安理
welcomes
会
the
中东
convening
问
of a
题
high-level
高级别
meeting
会议。
on the Middle East.
当前形势下，
Initiated
召
by
开
Arab
今天的会议
countries.
十分重要，
Under
也
current
十分必要。
circumstances, this
感
meeting
谢
is highly
各国
relevant
总
and
理主
necessary.
持
I
今
thank
天的
Prime
会议。
Minister Golub for chairing
我们
today's
都认
meeting.
真听取了国
We
家
all
卫生
listened
部长
carefully
所
to
做
the
的通报，
briefing of
对
Mr.
秘书
Secretary
长先
General
生以及联合国方面的
and
斡
commend
旋，
the efforts
以及促进中东和平所做的努
Mr.
力。
Secretary General and the UN to mediate the Palestinian-Israeli conflict
主席
and
先生，
promote
本
peace in the
轮
Middle East.
巴以冲突已
Mr.
经延
President,
续了
this
300 多
round of
个日
Palestinian-Israeli
夜，
conflict has
人道
lasted
危
more than
机
300
前所未
days.
有，
The
战争的
humanitarian
惨剧
crisis is
太令人
unprecedented, and the tragedies
加
of
沙民
war
众
are
惨遭
horrific.
轰炸、
The
封
people in
锁、
Gaza are
饱
suffering
受
under
饥
bombardment
饿、
and blockade
疾病折磨，
and from hunger
4
and
万多平
disease.
民失去生
More
命，
than
上
40,000
百万人
civilians
被
have
迫
lost their
流离失
lives,
所，
and millions are
妇女
displaced.
和儿童
Women and
首当
children
其
are the
冲。
first to suffer.
与此同时，从黎巴嫩
Meanwhile,
到叙
from
利亚，
Lebanon to
从
Syria,
也
from
门到
Yemen
伊朗，
to Iran,
冲突外溢，持
spillovers
续
of the
蔓延，
crisis
地
continue
区
to
热点
spread.
交织共振，
Regional hotspots are
冲突烈度
intertwined. The
螺旋上
intensity
升，
spiral
中东
upward,
局
and the
势令
situation
人
in the
担忧。
Middle East is worrying.
中东部分
When
天
the
下
Middle
两
East
岸
is
面
unstable,
对
the
当
world
前
is
的困难和
insecure.
挑战，
Faced with
国际
current
社会不
difficulties
能
and
置身事
challenges,
外，
the international
安理会更
community
不能
cannot
无
just
所
look
作为。
on, and the Security
在此，
Council
中方
cannot
提出
sit
4点
idly
主张：
by. China proposes
第一，
4 points.
战争冲突不
First,
能持续，
war and
必须
conflict must not
立即
continue. A
实现
comprehensive
全面停
ceasefire must be achieved
战
immediately.
争多延续一
One
天，
more day of
就会
war
有更多的
means
平民
more
遇
civilian
难，
casualties
家庭破
and
碎。
broken families.
冲突
One
多
more
蔓延
region where
一遇，
conflict
就会有
spreads
更多的
means
危
more
机外
spillovers
溢
of crisis
仇恨
and
衍生。
hatred. We
要
must
以最
act
大的
with the
紧迫
greatest
感
sense of
推动
urgency
加
to
沙永
promote
久停火、全
lasting
面撤军。
ceasefire and comprehensive withdrawal of
冲突
troops
当
in
事方
Gaza.
要全面
The
落
parties
实
to the
安理会有
conflict
关
must
决
fully
议，
implement the
尽
resolutions
快
of
做
the
出
Security
停火决断，
Council and make the decision
不要
of
再采取
ceasefire,
加剧
and not to
紧
take
张
any
局势的
adventurous moves
冒险
that
行为。
aggravate the tensions.
对当事方有重要影响的国
Countries
家，
with
要
important
拿出
influence
真
over the
诚、
parties
负责任的态
concerned
度，
should also
为平息
take
战火
a sincere
发
and
挥更多
responsible
建设
approach
性的作用，
and play a
切
more
实管控
constructive
和
role
防止危
in
机的外
promoting
溢。
a ceasefire and effectively managing
当前
and preventing
黎
the
以局势
spillover of
令人担
crisis.
忧。
The
黎巴嫩的主
Lebanon-Israeli
权
situation
应
is
当得到维
worrying.
护，
The sovereignty
黎巴
of
嫩人民
Lebanon
的
should
安
be
全
upheld, and the
应
people
当予以
of
保护。
Lebanon's safety should be
中方反对
protected.
一切滥用
China
武力、
opposes
加剧
all
地区
moves to
紧张的
abuse
行
force
动，
and aggravate tensions
谴
in the
责一切
regions.
伤
We
及
condemn
无辜
all
平民的行为。
actions that harm
我们敦促
innocent
有
civilians.
关方面
We
立即
urge
采取
the
措施，
relevant
防止
parties
局
to
势
take immediate
进一步恶
action
化，避
to
免造
prevent
成
further
更多的
escalation
人
of the
员伤亡。
situation and more casualties from being
第
created.
二，8人之8不能
Second,
背离，
we must
必
not
须携
deviate
手推
from
进
letting
战后治理
the。Palestinian people
加
govern
沙曾是
Palestine.
多
We
元文
must
明
work
的交汇
together
点，
for
如今却
post-war
被
governance.
战火
Gaza used
吞
to
噬，
be where diverse civilizations met, but today it is engulfed in fighting. We must stick to the principles of Palestinians governing Palestine, Palestinian-led and Palestinian-owned, and take a coordinated approach on post-war governance of Gaza. We should encourage all factions of Palestine to implement the Beijing Declaration on ending division and strengthening Palestinian national unity, support the Palestinian National Authority in boosting its authority and governance capacity, and achieving effective jurisdiction over all territories of Palestine, and support the conduct of specific governance affairs with the Palestinian people at the center. China calls for holding a meeting on post-war reconstruction and calls on the international community, countries in the region, and regional organizations to take an active part. Third, justice must not be absent. We must revive the two-state solution as soon as possible. Last week, the emergency special session of the General Assembly adopted with overwhelming majority the first resolution introduced by Palestine, demanding implementation of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice and ending the illegal occupation of Palestinian territory by Israel. This is of historical significance. The resolution of the UN should not just be a sheet of paper, and the dream of the Palestinian people to build their own country or state cannot be negated. China urges relevant parties to immediately and comprehensively implement the resolution and to fulfill due international obligations. The Security Council should support Palestine in becoming a full member of the UN and to make new efforts for the two-state solution. China supports holding an international peace conference of larger scale, more authority, and more effectiveness, implementing a timetable and roadmap on the two-state solution in order to finally achieve the peaceful coexistence of the two countries of Palestine and Israel and harmony between the two peoples of Arabs and Jews. Fourth, international support must not be absent. We should uphold the peace and stability of the Middle East. The Middle East used to be a highland of civilization in the past. It should not become a low point of peace today. The international community should, on the basis of supporting the will of Middle East countries, support them in using their wisdom to settle hotspot issues in the region. Under the premise of mutual respect, fairness, and justice, we should work to create a security architecture that fits the history and reality of the Middle East and accommodates the legitimate concerns of all parties. We should support UN peacekeeping operations in the region in effectively fulfilling their mandate to promote de-escalation and peace and development. The international community should step up humanitarian assistance and ensure the effective access of humanitarian supplies, support the UN or UNRWA in playing its important role. Countries yet to resume funding for UNRWA should resume funding as soon as possible. We should help countries in the Middle East, especially those affected by the conflict, to achieve sustainable development and cement the foundation for lasting peace. We should firmly oppose external pressuring and interference and help the Middle East get rid of the shadows of conflict and confrontation. Mr. President, China is a strategic partner of the Middle East countries. We have always been a builder of peace, a promoter of stability, and a contributor to development in the Middle East. China never interferes in the internal affairs of Middle East countries, never draws spheres of influence in the region, and never fish selfish geopolitical gains using hotspot issues. What we do is for restoring peace and stability in the Middle East, to help the countries achieve stability and prosperity and deliver a happy life to the people there. War is a test of human conscience and justice, and peace requires the wisdom and determination of all countries. China stands ready to work with Arab and Muslim countries and all peace-loving countries that advocate justice to work for an early ceasefire, prevent spillover of the conflict, implement a two-state solution, and promote peace in the Middle East. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Wang for his statement. Now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad of Algeria.
شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس
Thank you,
على
President,
استجابتكم الكريمة
لطلبنا بعقد هذا الاجتماع، والشكر موصول كذلك للسيد الأمين العام أنطونيو غوتيريش على إحاطته الدقيقة والمعبرة حول الملف الذي يشغلنا اليوم. لقد بادر وفد بلادي بطلب تنظيم اجتماعنا هذا لتسليط الضوء مرة أخرى على المسؤولية الملقاة على عاتق مجلس الأمن تجاه ما تشهده غزة من إبادة جماعية متواصلة منذ ما يقرب العام كاملا، وتجاه ما تشهده منطقة الشرق الأوسط راهنا من تصعيد إسرائيلي خطير ينذر بنشوء حرب إقليمية شاملة قد تعصف بأمن واستقرار الجميع. إنها مسؤولية قانونية وسياسية وأخلاقية وإنسانية لمجلسنا أمام هول الجرائم الإسرائيلية بحق الفلسطينيين وبقية شعوب ودول المنطقة، وإنها أيضا مسؤولية راسخة لمجلسنا لا تقبل التبرير لعدم الالتزام بها تحت أي ظرف من الظروف، ولا تقبل التملص منها تحت أي ذريعة من الذرائع. وإنها أخيرا مسؤولية ثابتة لمجلسنا لا تتقادم ولا تسقط في ظل العجز الذي أصاب الهيئة المركزية هذه وشل من قدرتها على الاهتداء إلى سبل إنصاف الشعب الفلسطيني وإحقاق حقوقه. لقد التأم مجلسنا هذا عشرات المرات منذ بدء العدوان الإسرائيلي الغاشم على غزة، وقد أسفرت هذه الاجتماعات بعد طول مداولاتها وتعسر مفاوضاتها إلى اعتماد قرارين وحيدين يطالبان بوقف إطلاق النار في هذه الأرض الفلسطينية الجريحة. وهما القراران اللذان لم يعر لهما الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الاستيطاني ولا أدنى تقدير ولا أقل احترام، بل على العكس من ذلك تماما راح يمعن في جرائمه الشنعاء وانتهاكاته الصارخة وممارساته اللا إنسانية دون أن يلقى أي ردع حاسم أو أي إدانة صريحة أو حتى أبسط لوم أو انتقاد من لدن مجلسنا هذا. وها نحن نقف اليوم على التداعيات الكارثية الناتجة عن إطلاق العنان للاحتلال الإسرائيلي والتساهل مع ممارساته الإجرامية وصرف الأنظار عن مخططاته التوسعية والتدميرية والتخريبية. فبعد أن كنا نرقب تطورات حرب الإبادة في النطاق المحدود لقطاع غزة،
At the beginning, we were just observing the developments of a genocide within Gaza. However, now we see an expansion of such a war to the West Bank, in addition to an Israeli escalation in the entire region, going from Yemen to Syria to Iran and reaching Lebanon, where the crimes of the occupation have even escalated by stages. What has been committed in Gaza throughout that year and recently in Lebanon cannot be described diplomatically, politically, or legally.
فهمجية هذه الجرائم وصلت
Those
إلى حدود ما هو لا
were
حضاري
so barbaric
ولا أخلاقي
that they are uncivilized, immoral, and inhumane.
لقد أقام مجلس الأمن
The Security Council
الدنيا
moved heaven and
وأقعدها
earth in
في مواقف سابقة
previous situations
لا ترقى أن
that
تشكل
cannot even
قطرة
constitute a
من
drop
بحر
in an
الانتهاكات
ocean
الإسرائيلية
of the Israeli
بكافة
violations
الأعراف
of all
والمواثيق
international
الدولية.
norms and conventions.
ولقد لجأ مجلسنا هذا
Our
إلى الفصل
council
السابع
has
من
resorted
الميثاق
to chapter
لفرض
7
الحظر
of the charter
والعقوبات
to impose bans
في
and
حالات
sanctions
أقل
in
بكثير
situations
مما يحدث في غزة
that were
وفي لبنان وفي
not
سائر الجوار الفلسطيني
as hard
فداحة وخطورة
or
وجسامة.
dangerous
ولقد كان
as is
مجلسنا
the
هذا
case in Gaza or
وراء
Lebanon
تحريك
or in
الهيئات
the neighboring
القضائية
countries of
الدولية
Palestine. Our
وتأديبها
council
في مواضع لا
has
تقارن
actually
البتة
moved different
مع
international
هول
judicial
وهمجية ما
organs
شهدناه ولا نزال
to
نشهده
take
من
action
جرائم
on
الاحتلال
situations
الإسرائيلي.
that are not even as close
إننا
as the barbaric
وإذا نستعرض
scenes we have
تجارب
witnessed due to the
المجلس
crimes of the Israeli
السابقة
occupation
في التعامل الحازم
in the
والصارم
areas mentioned above.
مع عدم احترام قراراته الملزمة
We
نجد
review the
أنفسنا أمام
experiences
جملة
of the council in the
من
past and
التساؤلات
how
التي
they
تطرح
have
نفسها بكل
taken
إصرار
certain stances and addressed
إلى متى؟
with
إلى
determination
متى يبقى
the
الاحتلال
situation where
الإسرائيلي
its
الاستيطاني
binding resolutions were not respected.
يحظى بنظام
However, that
خاص
matter
من
begs certain
اللامساءلة
questions. For instance,
واللا
until
محاسبة
when will we
واللا
continue
معاقبة
seeing this settler
نظام
Israeli occupation going without
ينطبق
any
عليه
accountability or
دون سواه.
punishment? Why does it have
إلى متى؟
one system that is
إلى
only
متى
applicable
يبقى هذا
to the
الاحتلال
Israeli occupation?
محرر اليدين
Till when will we give free
ومطلق
hand
السراح
to this occupation? Till
يمعن
when we will
في
let it
الإجرام
be free to
مثل ما
continue
يشاء ويدوس الشرعية الدولية
flouting
أينما شاء
international legitimacy wherever
ويعبث
they want,
بأمن
trampling
واستقرار
upon the
المنطقة
peace and
كيفما شاء
security of the region as they
دون
wish,
أن يتحمل
without
أو يحمل تبعات أفعاله
shouldering the responsibility
وعواقب
of
ممارساته.
such acts
وإلى
and
متى؟
actions, and without
إلى متى
us
يبقى هذا
making them
الاحتلال
carry that
يتمادى
responsibility?
في طغيانه
Until when this
وتسلطه
occupation will continue with
وكأنه
this
يملك
tyranny
بيديه
and despotism,
مصير
as if
ومستقبل
they
الفلسطينيين
have a free hand in the
بل مصير
destiny and future of
ومستقبل
Palestinians.
المنطقة
It's
برمتها
even the destiny and
دون أن
future
يتم
of the entire
وضع
region
حد لهذا
without
التجبر
putting any
ولهذا
end
الغرور.
to such arrogance.
إننا نعتقد جازمين
We firmly
ومخلصين
and sincerely
أن الإبقاء
believe
على وضع كهذا يعني
that
الرهان على
keeping
الأسوأ،
the status quo is a
الرهان
real
على
bad bet.
تشجيع
It's betting
وترسيخ
on encouraging
هيمنة
the
المحتل
hegemony of the
والرهان
occupier,
على تكريس واقع
betting on
الاحتلال
perpetuating
والتوسع
the fact of
بالقوة
the occupation and the
والرهان
forceful
على تعبيد
expansion of the
الطريق
occupation,
واسعا
betting on paving
أمام
the way
المخطط
for
الإسرائيلي
the Israeli schemes
الذي
that will
سيدفع لا محالة
undoubtedly push
بالفلسطينيين
the Palestinians
وبجميع دول المنطقة
and all the
نحو
countries of the
مصير
region
لا يصعب
towards
البتة التنبؤ
a destiny that
بمآلاته
is easily predictable,
وتداعياته
for we know full
الكارثية
well
على
its
الجميع.
catastrophic repercussions
إن
on everyone.
خطورة هذه التطورات لا تدع أي مجال
The
لتماطل
dangerous
أو تقاعس
developments
مجلسنا هذا في
that we
العمل
have witnessed
على إعلاء
leave no
المسؤولية
room
الملقاة
for
على عاتقه
procrastination or inaction from our council. We have to shoulder our
ومعهم
responsibility.
اللبنانيون
Palestinians,
وكافة دول وشعوب المنطقة لا
the
يطلبون
Lebanese, and all
المستحيل
the peoples
أو
and countries
المحال.
of the region
إنهم
are not
يطلبون
calling for the impossible. They
تحرك
are merely
مجلسنا هذا لوقف ما
asking our
يطاله
council
من
to
تقتيل
act to put an
وتنكيل
end to the killing,
وخراب
torture,
وتدمير
and destruction.
وإنهم يطلبون
They are just
تحرك مجلسنا هذا
for our
لفرض
council to
احترام ما
act
اعتمده
to
من قرارات
ensure
ملزمة
respect for its binding
وإنهم
resolutions.
يطلبون
They
تحرك
are merely
مجلسنا هذا
asking
لتغليب ما
our
يقره
council to
القانون
act
الدولي
to
من
prioritize
قواعد
the
وضوابط
rules,
وأحكام
regulations,
يتساوى
and laws
الجميع
of the international
في
law
واجب احترامها
that we must all be
والامتثال
equal
والاحتكام
in
إليها.
respecting and complying.
وقناعتنا تبقى
We
راسخة
strongly believe
من أن تمادي الاحتلال
that
الإسرائيلي
the
في إجهازه على القضية
persistent
الفلسطينية
trampling
لن يزيد
of
هذه
the
القضية
Israeli occupation
إلا
on the
توهجا
Palestinian question will
وبروزا
only fuel this question.
كأعدل قضية
It
على
will
وجه
make it the
المعمورة
most just cause
ولن
on
يزيد
earth.
الشعب الفلسطيني
It would only
إلا عزما
make the
وإصرارا
Palestinian
على
people more
استرجاع
adamant
حقوقه
and
الوطنية
determined to
المسلوبة
regain
ولن
their
يزيد
full
المجموعة
national rights. It
الدولية
would only
إلا إيمانا
enhance the
بأحقية وحتمية
faith and
إقامة
certainty of the
الدولة
international
الفلسطينية
community
المستقلة والسيدة
the
كحل
right
عادل
and
كحل
necessity
دائم
for Palestinian
كحل نهائي
statehood. It's a
للصراع
just,
العربي
lasting and
الإسرائيلي
final solution to the
وكشرط
Arab-Israeli
لا غنى
conflict. It's
عنه
an imperative
لاستعادة
and
الأمن
indispensable condition
والاستقرار
to bring
في
about
منطقة الشرق الأوسط
security and
قاطبة.
stability in the
وشكرا
entire
سيادة
Middle East
الرئيس.
region. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Attaf for his statement. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hugh Hilton Todd, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Guyana.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Secretary General, colleague foreign ministers, permanent representatives, all. Mr. President, I thank you for convening this meeting and express my thanks to the delegation of Algeria for initiating the discussion on the ongoing situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. I also thank the Secretary General for his briefing. Mr. President, in a few days, it will be 1 year since the Hamas attack on Israel and the brutal war of retaliation on Gaza. This is another year added to the many decades of violence since 1948. Recently, however, there have been some extremely worrying dynamics. I will highlight 3 of them so that we can take cognizance of what they mean for the prospects of achieving a permanent solution, the rule of international law, and the legitimacy of the United Nations, including this Council. First, the systemic compromising of the humanitarian response. It is characterized by reduced access into Gaza, restrictions on the entry of life-saving necessities, non-functioning deconfliction mechanisms, targeted attacks on humanitarian personnel, including those of the United Nations, as well as targeted attacks on civilian infrastructure, including schools and hospitals. Second is the attempt to control the narrative about war, deliberately putting out false and misleading information about what is happening in Gaza, or attempting to muzzle those who are vocal about the atrocities taking place. We have heard, for example, that there is no challenge regarding the supply of humanitarian assistance to Gaza, except the United Nations' inability to handle the flood of aid. We have also seen the killings of journalists, even in instances where they were wearing clearly marked press vests. Just over the weekend, we saw the forceful closure of one media outfit in the West Bank. The misinformation campaign against UNRWA and its unproven accusations cost the agency dearly at the beginning of this year. though a substantial amount of funding has been restored, significant voluntary contributions are still being withheld. The move by the Israeli Kesenet, hope I got it right, to designate the agency as a terrorist organization is another dangerous element of the misinformation campaign. The third element, and perhaps the most worrying, is the blatant and seemingly entrenched disregard for international law by the occupying power that characterizes not just this war, but the Israeli-Palestinian conflict more generally. This disregard is made even more dangerous by the accompanying lack of accountability, creating a situation of impunity. This is the principal reason for the protracted and stalled situation regarding the Palestinian question, and the reason that no solution seems imminent. Mr. President, I conclude with 3 appeals. 1, we need an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all hostages and illegally detained Palestinians, and an end to the campaign of violence in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. We also need a de-escalation of tensions across the region and for all parties, including Israel, to cease their provocative actions. 2, we need concerted international efforts to support of the well-being of the Palestinian people, both in the immediate and long term. This must include action by the Security Council to end the war in Gaza and the heightened violence in the West Bank. It has gone on for too long, far too long, and we must take decisive steps to end it and to secure peace in the region. And thirdly, we need to end this war and make progress towards achieving a 2-state solution. We cannot allow Israel to continue dismantling the 2-state solution. Ghana is committed to doing its part on all of these fronts. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Todt for his statement. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Manuel Gonçalves, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique commends the Slovenian presidency for convening this important briefing on current situation in occupied Palestinian territories. We thank Algeria for requesting this timely briefing. We also thank the Secretary General for his important statement on the alarming situation in the Middle East. Mr. President, the situation in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories remain critical. We have witnessed a significant escalation in violent and militarized operations, causing a higher number of casualties, extensive destruction of immeasurable civil infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, and shelters. The expansion of settlements has also intensified, leading to forced displacement and illegitimate property demolitions. This deeply deplorable situation is further exacerbating tension and undermining any prospect for peace. It is imperative to emphasize that Israel's settlements in occupied Palestinian territories are illegal, unacceptable, and blatant violation of international law. The International Court of Justice has underscored that These settlements and the associated police amount to de facto annexation and systematic discrimination against Palestinians. We urge the government of Israel to hold accountable any individuals and entities responsible for violence against civilians in the West Bank. Mr. President, given the grave situation prevailing in Gaza Strip and West Bank, we reiterate our call for immediate ceasefire, release of hostages and all other captive, safe and conditional humanitarian access, ensuring that aid reaches those in need without restriction. It is crucial for the international community and the Security Council in particular to continue to pursue diplomatic solutions, especially as the regional spillover becomes an unfortunate reality in the Middle East. Mr. President, we commend the completion of the first round of a polio vaccination campaign in Gaza. These achievements exemplifies the collaboration and dedication of all parties involved, including the World Health Organization. We urge all parties to show the same spirit of cooperation and guide the facilitation of second round of vaccination planned for October and any other humanitarian assistance. Ensuring that the children receive this vital vaccination is crucial for their health and well-being, especially in the region facing such challenging circumstances. Mr. President, in the light of current crisis in the occupied Palestinian territories, including Gaza Strip in particular, we are of view that this Security Council must take the following set of urgent actions. 1, call for direct dialogue between the parties. 2, influence the parties to de-escalation. 3, halt the regional expansion of the conflict. 4, ensure scrupulously respect for international humanitarian law and international human rights. Mozambique extended its appreciation and encouragement to UN members, humanitarian workers, regional organizations for their tireless contribution to peace and security in Gaza Strip. We reiterate our consistent and unwavering commitment to the vision of a two-state solution where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, as full members of the United Nations, coexist peacefully and securely within recognized borders consistent with international law and the relevant United Nations resolutions. Mozambique further stresses the importance of unifying the Gaza Strip with the West Gaza and the Palestinian Authority. Thank you so much, President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gonzalez for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sergei Lavrov, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас, госпожа
председатель,
уважаемые министры,
distinguished
коллеги,
ministers,
дамы и
colleagues,
господа.
ladies and gentlemen.
Благодарим
We
генерального
thank the
секретаря за
Secretary
его
General
оценку
for his
ситуации на
assessment of
Ближнем
the situation
Востоке
in the Middle East
с
with
фокусом
a
на
focus on the
беспрецедентный уровень
unprecedented
конфронтации
level of
на
confrontation on the
оккупированной
occupied
Palestinian
Palestinian territory
и в
and on
Ливано-Израильском
the
приграничье.
Lebanon-Israeli border area. This is a conflict which is also having consequences in other parts of the region, with fallout being felt in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman. The vast area of the entire Middle East and North Africa continue to have hotbeds of instability persisting. The spiraling violence has gone far beyond the area of the Arab-Israeli confrontation, destabilizing the situation not just in the above-mentioned regions, but also in the Mediterranean Sea, the Persian Gulf, and in North Africa as a whole. The root cause of these crises has been and remains the fact that the Palestinian issue remains unresolved. At the epicenter of the current confrontation, there is the Gaza Strip, where what began in October 2023, I refer to the latest wave of military operations. This has become the most brutal and lengthiest in the entire succession of Arab-Israeli wars. The number of the dead has surpassed 41,000. The number of the wounded and missing persons is nearing 100,000. The majority of victims are civilians in the Strip, including many women, children, and the elderly. Amid the military operations and Israel's establishment of a blockade of the Strip, the situation is expeditiously deteriorating. This Strip has become the largest open-air prison from which people simply cannot flee. According to the president of the ICRC, Madam Spolarich, the Israeli military operation underwent a full paradigm shift towards, I quote, dehumanization and the stripping of civilians of human dignity. I would like everybody to recall our steadfast position, which remains unchanged. There is no justification for the terrorist attack on 7 October. However, collective punishment against all Palestinians is unacceptable. I recalled the figures of the dead civilians, 41,000 in 1 year after the 7th of October. This is double, more than double, the number of civilians killed on both sides of the conflict in Ukraine in 10 years after the brutal coup which took place in February 2014. In 1 year, 2 times more Palestinians were killed than in 10 years of civilian casualties on both sides in Ukraine. Despite the fact that both the Security Council and the General Assembly adopted a number of resolutions with call for a ceasefire and the establishment of sustained humanitarian access to Gaza, the Israeli army operation is ongoing. 10 days ago, the General Assembly adopted a resolution in support of the advisory opinion of the ICJ, which explicitly refers to the illegal nature of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands and the need to bring this to an end. The overwhelming majority of the Council's membership supported this initiative to achieve a just and lasting resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and for the exercise of the rights of the Palestinian people to establish their own independent state within the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. In this regard, we have categorical resolutions of the United Nations and our common objective of enforcement thereof. The fact that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict remains unresolved is destabilizing, as I've already mentioned, is destabilizing the entire region. The unprecedented brutality and devastation of the consequences in Gaza has triggered a sharp escalation in the Lebanon-Israeli confrontation, and the images of the ongoing strikes along the blue line and within Lebanon and Israel have circulated around the world. The Middle East is at the precipice of a full-blown war, which, as it seems, some keenly wish to see transpire. On the 23rd of September alone, as a result of large-scale Israeli bombardment of Lebanon, at least 558 people died. This includes 50 children, 94 women, more than 1,600 people were wounded. According to the UNICEF mission in Lebanon, the UNICEF representative in Lebanon, in one day in Lebanon, more people were killed than in the past 11 months. The dead include 2 staff members of the Office of the High Commissioner for refugees. Tens of thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes. We strongly condemn the actions of the Israeli side, which blatantly violates the sovereignty of the friendly country of Lebanon. The indiscriminate attacks whose casualties are civilians are categorically unacceptable. The path of war that was embraced by West Jerusalem will not allow it to return the displaced persons to the north of the country, nor will it ensure security in the Lebanon-Israeli border area. And this is attested to by the experience of the 2006 Israeli campaign, when even the vast arsenal of the most cutting-edge military equipment and weaponry did not result in Israel achieving the goals it set out. There's a need to immediately end the spiraling violence before the situation completely spirals out of control, which, as we see, some very much wish to see transpire to provoke a full-blown war. We call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, which will result in an end to further bloodshed and will create conditions for a diplomatic and political resolution. As I understand, just today, an order was issued to bomb Beirut. We consistently and steadfastly emphasize the need for the full, comprehensive implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. This resolution stipulates both Israel's obligations to end all offensive military operations, withdraw its troops from South Lebanon, and end the occupation of Lebanese lands. And it also stipulates the obligation of Hezbollah to withdraw all of its formations to the north of the Litani River. For our part, we are undertaking robust diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the situation, to prevent the most catastrophic scenario. We stand ready to cooperate with international and regional partners to that end. We believe that the security of any state must not be ensured at the expense of the security of others. We fully support UNIFIL, which plays a stabilizing role on the Blue Line. It is precisely the presence of peacekeepers that had for a long time reduced the risk of an outbreak of full-blown military confrontation. There's a need to scrupulously ensure the safety and security of Blue Helmets. Madam President, the Security Council is not merely a platform for exchanging views on the most pressing global issues. This is also the main body for the maintenance of international peace and security, a body that has a myriad of time-tested instruments to enforce its resolutions. The membership of the Security Council needs to place the interests of the peoples of Palestine and Israel above the short-sighted political calculations of certain actors, and to demand an immediate ceasefire, the release of all illegally detained persons, and the full-fledged ensuring of humanitarian access to those in need. The violators of Security Council resolutions need to be strictly held accountable, without which our resolutions will remain dead letter. I wish to turn to the representative of the United States. The choice is yours. Either you continue to block the work of the Security Council, or you stand on the side of the world, on the side of the international community, and demand an end to the war. Without your comprehensive support for Israel, the conflict could end quickly and effectively. This would help to establish conditions for a return to peace talks on the establishment of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state, coexisting in peace and security with Israel. Negotiations, of course, need to be carried out under the aegis of the international community without manipulation by any side. We have seen all of this. This all results in catastrophe. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lauro for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Lord Ray Collins of Highbury, Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, President. President, let me start by underscoring a very clear message from my government. We need an immediate ceasefire and release of hostages in Gaza now, and we need an immediate ceasefire across the Lebanon-Israel border now. We are on the brink of a much larger regional war, which risks even more devastation and suffering. Unfortunately, as we have seen both on the ground today with further strikes in Beirut, and as we have heard from speeches in the General Assembly Hall, the escalation continues. We urge Israel and Hezbollah to heed the calls of the United Kingdom and our partners to immediately agree a 21-day ceasefire. Calm heads must prevail to end this cycle of violence. President, today's meeting was called to focus on the dire situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. Almost 1 year into the conflict, 41,000 Palestinians have been killed, and hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians lack access to clean water and sanitation, facing the threat of disease and famine. And 101 hostages are still held by Hamas in horrific conditions as Israel and its people continue to reckon with the aftermath of the worst terrorist attack in history. It is clear that there can be no military solution to this conflict. Israel and Hamas must agree a deal urgently. In the meantime, Israel must fulfill its commitment to flood Gaza with humanitarian aid. Sadly, this has not yet materialized. Ahead of a winter, Israel must ensure that the right supplies and equipment can enter Gaza to protect vulnerable families. And it must ensure it complies with its obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilians. Only last week, over 200 Palestinians were killed in Gaza, and many continue to live under a relentless barrage of attacks, unsafe in the shelters where they seek refuge. The United Kingdom is also deeply concerned by the situation in the occupied West Bank. We call on Israel to exercise restraint, adhere to international law, and clamp down on actions of those who seek to inflame tensions. The closure of Algeria's offices in Ramallah by the IDF is contrary to the democratic principles that Israel is rightly proud of. Media freedom and security of journalists must be respected. President, without a revitalized political process towards a two-state solution, we will not achieve a sustainable peace. We need galvanized international efforts to this end and to realize a safe and secure Israel alongside a safe and secure Palestinian state. This must include the reunification of Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, in line with 1967 borders and under the effective control of the Palestinian Authority. President, planning for Gaza's future must also put Palestinians at the center of governance, security, recovery, and reconstruction efforts. This is the only way to deliver a lasting stability. Together, we must stop the region slipping into a deeper crisis and pull it back on the path towards a peaceful future. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Lord Collins of Highbury for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Secretary General for his insightful briefing. As my delegation reiterated at this week's Security Council briefing on Lebanon, we are deeply troubled by the heightened hostilities across the blue line. Today's large-scale strikes in Beirut have further deepened the gravity of our concern. All actors in the region must de-escalate and seriously consider the possible catastrophe at the end of this dangerous cycle of violence. Maximum restraint is still the best option. Amid the unprecedented escalation in Lebanon and Israel, we remain extremely concerned by the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, as well as surging violence and instability in the West Bank, including strengthened movement restrictions for Palestinians. We are and should be still hopeful for the release of all hostages and an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, as well as an urgent de-escalation in Lebanon. In this regard, we fully support all diplomatic efforts by key regional and global stakeholders, including the recent US-France-led initiative on securing an immediate 21-day ceasefire across the Lebanon-Israel border. We call on both sides to accept this without delay. On the other hand, we are dismayed that, according to last week's media reports, quoting high-level officials, the deal for Gaza, mediated by US, Qatar, and Egypt, may not be reached for months. We assume that the direct parties have many political and military considerations in the negotiating process. However, the humanitarian suffering of both Palestinian civilians and Israeli hostages in Gaza permits no time to calculate such equations. As humanitarian suffering deepens in Gaza and the West Bank, the foundation of long-term peace will further deteriorate and break down with multi-generational resentment and anger. Thus, a swift ceasefire is essential for not only to relieve the current humanitarian suffering, but also to establish the conditions requisite for durable peace and stability in the Middle East. Madam President, the current conflict in Gaza has a disproportionate impact on children, with a total shutdown of education throughout Gaza. However, even in this dark reality, we are witnessing a glimmer of hope for the future of these children through the selfless devotion of humanitarian workers. We applaud efforts led by UNRWA to establish temporary learning sites for more than 30,000 children. And it is painfully clear that additional efforts are greatly needed to restore, at least partially, the destroyed education system in Gaza, where 85% of school buildings have been damaged and more than 6,250 students have been out of class since October 7. Education is not only a fundamental human right enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also a crucial base to construct a brighter future and to cut the multi-generational inheritance of resentment and mistrust, both in Palestine and Israel. In this connection, we urge Israel to stop all strikes on schools. International humanitarian law must be upheld everywhere and at all times, and all parties must comply with their obligations. Children and schools must be protected for the sake of Gaza's future and for long-term peace in the Middle East and beyond. Madam President, yesterday's informal interactive dialogue between this Council and the Arab League provided a timely opportunity to listen to the sincere ideas and common vision of the Arab League. We appeal to all players in the region, including Israel and non-state actors, to pay heed to these strong calls from their neighbors. The region is tiptoeing towards even hotter flames, but there is still time to turn back and extinguish these fires through reinvigorated diplomacy and implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Republic of Korea for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias.
Thank you,
Señora Presidenta,
Madam President.
saludo y agradezco al Secretario General por su informe en esta reunión convocada para abordar la situación del territorio palestino ocupado.
In the occupied Palestinian territory. Colleagues,
Sobre la situación palestina, el Ecuador ha mantenido históricamente una posición de respaldo a una solución política negociada, definitiva y justa entre las partes, con la existencia de dos estados, Palestina e Israel, sobre la base de las fronteras de 1967 y de las resoluciones relevantes, entre ellas la 2334, adoptada en el 2016 por este Consejo, precisamente sobre el territorio palestino ocupado. La declaración de la
The presidential statement adopted by this Council in February 2023 fervently opposes all unilateral measures which may hamper peace and imperil the two-state solution. Such measures include the construction and expansion of settlements, land grabs, the so-called legalization of settlement outposts, the demolition of housing, and the displacement of civilians. Madam President, Ecuador enjoys friendly relations with the State of Israel and maintains a historic, long-held commitment to the right of the Israeli people to live in peace and security. As such, since the 7th of October, my country has, on myriad occasions, condemned fervently and unambiguously the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas. We've also continued to extend our condolences to the families of the victims of these heinous acts and expressed our solidarity with the people of Israel. Humankind must reject such acts. Justifying such acts paves the way towards the justification of other atrocities. All hostages taken by Hamas must be released immediately and without any conditions whatsoever attached. Since that day, thousands and thousands of civilians in Gaza have been mourned painfully. These have included women and children. Ecuador also stands in solidarity with their families and the Gazan people. There can be no justification whatsoever for visiting pain and death upon civilians. Neither is there any justification for using civilians as human shields. The principles of international humanitarian law must be upheld at all times. Violating these principles is gravely serious and has equally grave consequences. That would be the first step towards returning to the path of peace, a journey that was embarked upon by visionary and brave leaders whose steps, unfortunately, we have not been able to follow. Madam President, in 1994, 30 years ago now, the Norwegian Nobel Committee stated, and I quote, "For several decades, the conflict between Israel and its neighbors and between Israelis and Palestinians has been one of the most difficult to resolve and most threatening on the international political stage. The parties have inflicted great suffering upon each other." End quote. The Nobel Peace Prize was granted that year to Arafat, Perez, and Rabin for having made a substantial contribution to a historic process, and here I quote, "a process through which peace and cooperation may replace hatred and war." End quote. Today, we are standing at one of the darkest crossroads of our time. We must resurrect the spirit of the Oslo Accords to prevent war and hatred from continuing to triumph. We have to avoid this conflict continuing to drag on for decades due to political interests and a lack of courage. Extremism and barbarism must be stopped. Our common humanity has to and must prevail. Madam President, colleagues, in the Pact for the Future, adopted just 5 days ago, all of us reaffirmed, and I quote, "our commitment to act in accordance with international law, including the Charter of the United Nations and its purposes and principles, and to fulfill our obligations in good faith." End quote. Honoring this commitment effectively without excuses or prevarication will pave the way towards peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I give the floor now to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your briefing. Colleagues, this is a decisive moment for the region. As President Biden said earlier this week, and I quote, "all-out war is possible." But colleagues, all-out war is not inevitable. We are all too aware of the strong headwinds. However, there is still an opportunity to have a ceasefire with hostage release in Gaza and a diplomatic resolution of the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. Doing both, alongside efforts to integrate Israel into the region, could reinforce peace and stability. And it could breathe new life into what I think we all recognize has been a lack of progress toward a two-state solution. The decision to embrace that change, to take the difficult steps necessary to achieve a more safe, peaceful, prosperous future for all, lies not in the hands of the Security Council, but in the hands of decision makers in the region. But this council can support progress in the right direction. We can create opportunities for the forces of change to ultimately triumph over the forces of violence and terrorism, division, and despair. That is what President Biden has worked to achieve this past year. This work hasn't been without setbacks, and it certainly hasn't been easy, but he believes, and I believe, that the building blocks are there. First, a 21-day ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, which would provide space for a diplomatic solution consistent with Resolution 1701 that pulls Hezbollah forces back from the border and allows people to safely return to their homes in both countries. We've been working tirelessly to achieve this outcome and encourage all member states to support the proposal that the United States and other countries put forward earlier this week. Second, the framework for a ceasefire with release of hostages in Gaza is endorsed by this Council in Resolution 2735, which would end the war, allow for a surge of humanitarian assistance, and set the stage for the reunification of Gaza and the West Bank under a revitalized Palestinian Authority. And third, the potential historic normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which would further bind together Israel and the Arab world and help marginalize the terrorist proxies that are funded, armed, and sponsored by Iran, sowing chaos across the region. Achieving these three steps would require political will, but would make Israel more secure. And it would create the conditions for a better future for the Palestinian people, a future in which they enjoy equal dignity and security, freedom and self-determination. Colleagues, in just 10 days, we will mark the one-year anniversary of October 7th. 1 year since Hamas killed 1,200 people, murdering children in front of their parents and parents in front of their children. 1 year since Hamas unleashed sexual violence as a weapon of war. 1 year since Hamas took hundreds more hostage, including Americans and citizens from more than a dozen countries, some of which sit on this council. As President Biden said, the world must not flinch from the horrors of October 7th. Any country would have the right and responsibility to ensure that such an attack could never happen again. Israel is no different. With that, we must all recognize that allowing the terrorist group that committed this carnage to dictate the terms of peace is hardly a recipe for regional stability. And even as we press for a ceasefire and demand that all parties to the conflict protect civilians and humanitarian personnel, we all must not forget that Hamas continues putting civilians at risk every day in Gaza. But its refusal to accept the ceasefire deal on the table, by its continued practice of hiding fighters and commanders in schools and hospitals and tunnels under civilian infrastructure. Now there are members of this council that won't even utter the word Hamas, let alone condemn its brutality on October 7th and after it. But colleagues, acknowledging that reality does not mean ignoring the plight of the Palestinian people, We mourn the tens of thousands dead, nearly 100,000 injured this past year. Nor does it relieve pressure on Israel to protect civilians. Quite the opposite. What's more, while our eyes rightfully turn to the situation in Gaza and Lebanon, we cannot forget that Palestinians living in the West Bank have been subjected to violence from extremist settlers, watching in horror as their homes are set on fire, their olive trees uprooted, their land seized for illegal outposts and settlements. Their suffering, too, matters. Their humanity, too, matters. The current situation is so very clearly unsustainable. And while I wish there was a shortcut to peace, we know that's not the case. Not in the General Assembly, and not here in the Security Council, which has repeatedly underscored that a lasting and comprehensive resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only be achieved through direct negotiations between the parties, consistent with the principle of land for peace, previous resolutions, and international law. And so the United States will continue to oppose unilateral measures that undermine the prospects of negotiations toward a two-state solution. That includes one-sided resolutions like the one recently adopted by the General Assembly, which do little to bring Palestinians closer to a democratic state of their own. It also includes the advancement of Israel's program of settlements, which we have reiterated over and over again, hinders the prospects of peace, weakens Israel's security, and is inconsistent with international law. And it includes unilateral efforts to undercut the Palestinian Authority, whether by withholding the transfer of tax revenues owed to it under the Oslo Accords, or potentially not sustaining correspondent banking relationships between Israeli and Palestinian banks. We have been clear to Israeli officials that these relationships are necessary for preventing a deepening economic crisis in the West Bank, and that a lapse of these legitimate financial efforts would increase the risk of illicit financing, undercutting Israel's security. Colleagues, we have a shared responsibility to enable diplomacy between the parties. The 21-day ceasefire across the Israel-Lebanon border would allow negotiations toward a diplomatic solution, reducing tensions along the blue line and allowing people to return to their homes in both countries. The ceasefire with hostage release in Gaza, and ultimately a normalization deal with a firm commitment to a political horizon for the Palestinian people. Creating openings for diplomatic process takes political will, and it requires leaders to make some difficult decisions. But for the sake of Israeli, Palestinian, and Lebanese civilians, and all those in the region desperately hoping for peace, it is critical that those leaders make the right decisions. Let us help rather than hinder them in doing just that. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente, je remercie le secrétaire général de son exposé. Comme l'a dit le président Emmanuel Macron devant l'Assemblée générale mercredi, il ne doit pas y avoir de guerre au Liban. Nous appelons avec force Israël à cesser l'escalade en cours au Liban et le Hezbollah à cesser les tirs vers Israël. Depuis le début de la semaine, les frappes israéliennes ont déjà causé plusieurs centaines de morts civiles, dont des dizaines d'enfants. Le droit international
including dozens of children. International humanitarian law needs to be upheld. Civilians, be they Lebanese or Israeli, should under no circumstances be targeted. The large-scale strikes which took place today in the south suburb of Beirut once again wrought devastation and claimed many casualties. This must be brought to an end immediately. France is determined to achieve a cessation of hostilities along the blue line, in line with Resolution 1701, and we are committed to the security of civilian populations both in Israel and in Lebanon. In Gaza, the war has been raging for nearly a year. It needs to be brought to an end without further delay. The Security Council called for this through Resolution 2735, and it needs to contribute to bringing an end to the tragedy which is unfolding. There's a need for an immediate, permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. All hostages need to be released without delay. Obstacles to humanitarian assistance need to be lifted. The stability of the region is at stake. France condemns all attacks targeting schools, shelters for displaced persons, humanitarian and United Nations personnel. International humanitarian law is binding upon all, including Israel. There can be no double standards. We also pay tribute to the WHO, UNICEF, and UNRWA for having carried out successfully a vaccination campaign against polio. As we approach 7 October, France recalls its strong condemnation of the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas and other terrorist groups. France's commitment to the security of Israel is well known, and it is steadfast. The humanitarian emergency in Gaza should not prompt us to lose sight of the West Bank, where the situation is steadily deteriorating. The acceleration in settlement activities, which is illegal, and which France condemns, undermines the prospect of establishing a future viable and contiguous Palestinian state. The policy of terror perpetrated by settlers needs to end immediately. France condemns violations of the historic status quo on holy sites in East Jerusalem, and we condemn the provocations and unilateral measures which are liable to trigger a conflagration of the situation in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Madam President, amid the tragedy in the Middle East, inaction, particularly inaction on the part of the Security Council, is not an option. France supports the mediation efforts underway by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar. No effort should be spared to ensure that these negotiations bear fruit as soon as possible. Together with our partners, France is pursuing efforts towards the resumption of efforts to peace, to implement the two-state solution. We will remain proactive, including at the Security Council, which will have an important role to play, a rightful role to play when the time is right. In the immediate term, our duty is to continue to help the Palestinians to establish a future Palestinian state that is viable, sovereign, and contiguous. Measures geared towards undermining the Palestinian Authority need to end. We call on Israel not to obstruct the transfer of revenues to the Palestinian Authority. We support a reformed Palestinian Authority capable of delivering upon its responsibility throughout the Palestinian territories, including in the Gaza Strip. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I give the floor now to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, Madam President. And I also thank Secretary General for his briefing. From the start of this conflict, Malta's call has been consistent, unequivocal, and clear. Only a permanent and immediate ceasefire in Gaza will provide the necessary environment for de-escalation. We therefore remain gravely alarmed by the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory and beyond. This has resulted in unimaginable devastation and displacement, often on multiple occasions for countless civilians. Unfortunately, the outlook remains bleak. Nevertheless, accepting the status quo is not an option. We fully support the ongoing diplomatic efforts by the US, Egypt and Qatar towards achieving a ceasefire. This Council and the international community, too, have a critical role to play. Meanwhile, 110 hostages are still held captive by Hamas, forced to endure unimaginable conditions for almost a year. They must be released immediately and unconditionally, and reunited with their families and loved ones. At the same time, the humanitarian needs of the civilian population in Gaza are immense. More than 41,000 Palestinians, the majority of whom are women and children, have been killed. Israel's continued strikes continue to render the entire strip uninhabitable. While the UN is working tirelessly to prevent a polio epidemic, the health crisis has only deepened. Compromised hospitals suffer crippling shortages of fuel and medicine, all as acute levels of hunger persist. As children worldwide start their scholastic years, schools in Gaza continue to be attacked. The ongoing insecurity, including attempts to use educational facilities for non-education purposes, deprives children of their safety and access to education. Additionally, the dignity, safety, health, and rights of women and girls have been gravely undermined. They face a multitude of threats and hardships, including those due to rampant lawlessness and criminality within desperate communities. It is unacceptable that international humanitarian law, including the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution, and international human rights law, continue to be flagrantly disregarded. We further reiterate that Israel has a responsibility to provide adequate, unimpeded access for humanitarian aid into and across the Gaza Strip, including through opening all crossings. President, Malta is also gravely concerned that the situation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is quickly edging towards catastrophe. This cannot be allowed to occur. It would extinguish any remaining hope for peace. Civilian death and destruction caused by Israeli military operations and escalating settler violence, combined with demolitions, forced displacement, and intimidation, are rendering conditions unlivable for Palestinians. We reiterate that settlement activity is illegal under international law and undermines the contiguity of a future Palestinian state. In line with the ICJ advisory opinion of 19 July and the General Assembly resolution adopted last week, Israel is under an obligation to end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible. President, as the world continues to witness unprecedented regional suffering, which has now alarmingly spilled over into Lebanon, the latest news coming out of the country is deeply concerning, and we are monitoring developments closely. We stress that further escalation will not lead to a resolution of the conflict. We call on all parties to exercise utmost restraint and to de-escalate the situation through diplomacy and the agreement of a sustained ceasefire. This is the only path which will allow us to rebuild a necessary political horizon and lasting peace, a peace based on a two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as the future capital of two states, living side by side in peace and security, in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his briefing, which clearly highlights the precarious nature of the ongoing conflict in the occupied Palestinian territory and other parts of the region. Let me further acknowledge the leadership of the Secretary General and the commitment of the entire UN system to alleviate the plight of the Palestinian people. In this regard, we commend the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and UNRWA for collaborating with the Palestinian Ministry of Health to successfully roll out the polio vaccination campaign. We honor the service and ultimate sacrifice of the over 220 UN and other humanitarian workers who have lost their lives in this conflict and stand in solidarity with all frontline operational personnel. Madam President, in the briefing by the Secretary General delivered by the Chef de Cabinet on 17 July 2024, there was an urgent call for the parties to the conflict to end what the Secretary General referred to as a terrible war, quote unquote, and urged for a political solution in line with international law and relevant UN resolutions. Indeed, this war has been terrible, with far-reaching consequences for civilians that have resulted in a death toll of over 41,000 civilians, 95,818 injuries, and an estimated 1.9 million internally displaced people living in overcrowded sites. The congestion, combined with the severe shortage of water and sanitation services, has created a breeding ground for disease. We continue to be alarmed by the breakdown of law and order and the increase in the crime rate in Gaza, seriously affecting the safety and security of its citizens. Madam President, the steady rise in the violence and military operations in the West Bank by Israeli security forces and extremist settlers is dangerous and unacceptable. Israel's continued occupation and expansion policies could ignite tensions and provoke an even more deadly conflict. We urge Israel to cease all military operations in the West Bank to avoid claiming more civilian lives, destroying civilian infrastructure, and setting the stage where the two-state solution becomes untenable. We therefore condemn all attacks against civilians and call upon parties to the conflict to take immediate steps to de-escalate the situation. The latest wave of escalatory attacks between Israel and Hezbollah can only lead to a broader regional conflict as tensions continue to rise and the fighting along the Israel-Lebanon border persists. The ramp-up of activities across the region, with various parties taking offensive and retaliatory actions, is unprecedented and must immediately cease. With the protracted conflict in Gaza being our utmost priority for almost a year now, a solution to the crisis is needed more now than ever before. In this regard, let us highlight the following points. First, we emphasize the need for an urgent ceasefire in the entire region. Military operations have only inflicted damage on the civilian population, who remain prime targets and are sometimes being used as human shields. An immediate ceasefire, whether through a negotiated agreement or in response to the decisions of the Security Council, as demanded in Resolutions 2728 and 2735, or whether in compliance with international humanitarian law, must be urgently implemented by the parties to the conflict. The ongoing killings of civilians are not acceptable by any standard or justification. Second, we maintain that dialogue and diplomacy must precede violence and unilateral actions. Therefore, we reiterate a call for renewed dialogue and diplomacy, which is an embodiment of our dedication to the UN Charter, to justice, and to human rights. According to the UN Charter, it is that is the United Nations, collective responsibility to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war and reaffirm our faith in fundamental human rights and the dignity of all. We urge for the resumption of negotiations and speedy conclusion of a deal that allows for the release of the remaining 101 hostages, a permanent ceasefire, and increased access to humanitarian assistance. This was the intent and purpose of Resolution 2735 of this Council. We therefore reiterate our support for the efforts of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States in this regard. Thirdly, we call for respect for international law, including international humanitarian law that will guarantee the safety and security of civilians, including humanitarian personnel. We reject indiscriminate attacks against civilians and call for accountability for war crimes. We once again draw attention of the parties to the conflicts to the various advisory opinions of the International Court of Justice, which on different occasions has clearly outlined its valued opinion on various questions regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict, not least its opinion of 19th July 2024, which concluded that the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory is unlawful. In conclusion, Madam President, the resounding call from the international community during the UNGA 79 high-level debate this week on the situation in Gaza was for efforts to work towards the path of peace and not to give up hope for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. We therefore support the relaunch of a political process that will lead to the achievement of the two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. It has been proven over the years that a fragmented approach without a holistic examination of the root causes and legitimate concerns of the parties to the conflict is pointless. Therefore, the relaunch of a peace process must be consultative, guided by the principles of international law, the UN Charter, and all resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council. We must not renege in delivering peace to the children of Gaza and the future generations in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Secretary General for his sobering briefings, and also I express our deep appreciation to the UN organizations and their staff on the ground for their humanitarian roles under the extremely dangerous situation. The conflict in Gaza has gone on for nearly a year. Every day brings additional suffering to both Israelis and Palestinians. Japan reiterates our strong condemnation of the brutal acts of terror, as well as the killing of hostages by Hamas and other militant groups. At the same time, enormous number of civilian casualties caused by Israeli military operations is intolerable. The humanitarian situation is simply catastrophic, depriving the people of Gaza of their dignity. Let us be clear, hostages must be released. Civilians must be protected. Humanitarian personnel must be guaranteed a safer operating space. International law must be respected. And most importantly, the conflict and violence must end immediately. The longer this conflict continues, the more civilians will be victimized, the more people will suffer from hunger and disease, and the more children will be orphaned and traumatized. It is too late for many, but still we should call to prioritize their well-being, not to fight for a military victory. There is no winner in a competition of pain. This is why the parties, in particular Hamas, must swiftly move towards the conclusion of a deal in accordance with the Council's Resolution 2735. This will pave the way to release hostages, bring an immediate ceasefire, and expand aid delivery throughout Gaza. Japan reiterates its unwavering support for the tireless mediation efforts by the US, Egypt, and Qatar. Madam President, we have also witnessed the alarming escalation in the West Bank. The heavy civilian fatalities and massive destruction of civilian infrastructure are deeply concerning. The General Assembly has recently adopted a resolution following up on the ICJ advisory opinion. As a country which attaches great importance to the role of the ICJ and the rule of law, Japan voted in favor of the resolution after thorough consideration. Israel's settlement activities are in violation of international law. Japan strongly urges the government of Israel to completely halt its settlement activities as the GA resolution demands. We also condemn the violence by the extreme settlers. As we all know, the only viable path to resolve this tragic conflict is a two-state solution, where both Israel and the future independent Palestinian state live side by side in peace and security. This requires confidence building and sustainable dialogue between the parties, not hostilities or hatred. Diplomacy must prevail, even in this time of difficulty and darkness. Japan will continue to play its part to seek a peaceful way out of this decades-long conflict. Madam President, last but not least, we are compelled to address the extremely dangerous situation in Lebanon. Japan is strongly concerned about the escalation of tensions between Israel and Hezbollah and deeply saddened by the numerous civilian casualties. Japan has joined the statement along with the like-minded countries calling for immediate 21-day ceasefire. We call on all parties to endorse temporary ceasefire immediately, consistent with the Security Council Resolution 7001, and give a real chance for diplomatic settlement. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Japan for the statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci Madame la Présidente et je vous remercie pour l'organisation de ce briefing de haut niveau. Je salue également la présence parmi nous de nombreux ministres. Elle témoigne de la volonté de la communauté internationale de prévenir le risque d'une escalade encore plus grave et de retrouver le chemin de la paix. Mes remerciements vont également au secrétaire général pour son briefing au Conseil. La Suisse se joint à l'appel du secrétaire général à une désescalade immédiate dans la région. Nous sommes profondément préoccupés par la situation au Liban, notamment après les frappes qui ont fait plus de 700 morts cette semaine. Et nous condamnons le fait que ces frappes aient fait beaucoup de victimes civiles. L'attaque massive qui s'est produite aujourd'hui dans le sud de Beyrouth, ainsi que les roquettes qui continuent d'être tirées sur Israël, sont extrêmement préoccupantes. Nous appelons toutes les parties à un retour immédiat à la cessation totale des hostilités et à l'application intégrale de la résolution 1701. Toutes les parties doivent exercer la plus grande retenue et prendre toutes les précautions nécessaires pour protéger les civils en conformité avec leurs obligations en vertu du droit international humanitaire, conventionnel et coutumier. La Suisse soutient les efforts diplomatiques en cours pour arriver à une cessation des hostilités de part et d'autre de la ligne vue. La spirale de violence contre laquelle ce Conseil s'est unanimement exprimé depuis les actes du terreur du 7 octobre que nous avons fermement condamnés doit impérativement cesser. Excellences, comme mesure immédiate, aussi pour une désescalade dans la région, la Suisse continue à appeler à un cessez-le-feu immédiat à Gaza, à la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de tous les otages, ainsi qu'à un accès humanitaire sûr, rapide et sans entrave. Les parties doivent respecter leurs obligations de droit international. La Suisse renouvelle son soutien à l'engagement de l'ONU et en particulier à nos collègues humanitaires qui sont si souvent une cible dans ce conflit. En mai dernier, l'adoption par ce Conseil de la résolution 2730 a réaffirmé que la protection du personnel humanitaire du personnel des Nations Unies et du personnel associé est une obligation en vertu du droit international humanitaire. Sans protection du personnel humanitaire, de leurs locaux et de leurs biens, la récente campagne de vaccination contre la polio à Gaza n'aurait tout simplement pas pu être menée. La première phase de cette campagne a pourtant prouvé que les Nations Unies peuvent remplir leur mission d'aide humanitaire s'il existe une volonté politique de mettre en place le cadre nécessaire à cet effet, conformément aux obligations du droit international. Il est grand temps que les parties respectent ces obligations et que l'accès humanitaire sûr et sans entrave à toutes les personnes dans le besoin soit enfin garanti de manière durable. Les mesures que requiert le respect du droit international humanitaire ont un impact crucial sur la vie et le bien-être des civils. La Suisse continuera d'insister sur l'obligation qui lie tous les États, selon l'article 1 commun aux conventions de Genève, de respecter et faire respecter le droit international humanitaire. War have rules. Dans cet esprit, la Suisse exécutera le mandat qui lui a été conféré par l'Assemblée générale dans la résolution qu'elle a adoptée le 18 septembre. Nous organiserons une conférence de haute partie contractante à la 4e Convention de Genève dans les 6 prochains mois. Le strict respect de la mise en œuvre du droit international humanitaire est aussi un pas fondamental vers la désescalade régionale qui est elle-même une étape cruciale vers la paix. Madame la Présidente, Excellences, la paix passe par la volonté politique et par la mise en œuvre des résolutions de ce Conseil. C'est le cas pour celles qu'il a adoptées depuis le 7 octobre à propos de Gaza et qui contiennent tous les éléments nécessaires à la désescalade et à la relance d'un processus de paix viable. Mais la paix passe aussi par la mise en œuvre des résolutions précédant le 7 octobre, comme la 2334. Comme l'affirme l'avis consultatif de la CIG du 19 juillet dernier, que la Suisse soutient l'illégalité de l'occupation israélienne du territoire palestinien qui a cours depuis 1967 ne fait maintenant aucun doute. Elle doit cesser et un horizon politique doit être rétabli. À ce propos, la Suisse salue le fait que l'Assemblée générale est appelée à la tenue, durant la 79e session, d'une conférence internationale en vue de l'instauration d'une paix globale, juste et durable au Proche-Orient. La solution à deux États est le seul socle à même de garantir la paix entre Israéliens et Palestiniens et la stabilité dans la région. Nous devons contribuer à reconstruire, sans plus tarder, ce fondement des deux États démocratiques, Israël et la Palestine, dont Gaza fait partie intégrante, vivant côte à côte en paix à l'intérieur de frontières sûres et reconnues. La Suisse est prête à s'engager en ce sens aux côtés de l'ONU, des membres du Conseil et des États de la région. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ayman Safadi, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of Jordan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Your Excellency, Madam Ambassador, dear colleagues, a few days ago, a Palestinian-Israeli girl dared to say what Israel has forbidden. She said the truth. She said that in Gaza there are children that are starving and there are no more homes to shelter them. But this left how loose against her by the hatred sown by Israel's extremist racist incitement into the minds of children as young as 13 years old. Students at her school in Beersheba attacked her at the instigation of their teacher. After that, her school administration expelled her on charges of incitement before amending the decision to suspend her from school pending an investigation into the incident. An investigation precedents prove
مثل حال التحقيق في قتل جندي إسرائيلي الصحفية الفلسطينية الأمريكية شيرين أبو عاقلة التي مزق جندي إسرائيلي آخر صورة لها في مكتب قناة الجزيرة في رام الله بعد إغلاقه الأسبوع الماضي في فعل يقدم شاهدا آخر على عمق الكراهية وتحريم قول الحقيقة في إسرائيل. احتفل الطلبة الذين هاجموا الطفلة بطردها من المدرسة بنشر فيديوهات على وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي يكررون فيها تحريض الوزير الإسرائيلي المتطرف بن غفير الذي كان عضوا في منظمة كانت الولايات المتحدة سابقا صنفتها إرهابية احرقوا قريتها. نائب رئيس بلدية مدينتها طالب بتهجير أسرة الطفل، وحسب محامي الطفلة يتلقى أفراد الأسرة يوميا تهديدات أن رؤوسهم ستقطع. لم تقتل الحكومة الإسرائيلية الأطفال الفلسطينيين وتدمر بيوتهم وتفجر مدارسهم وتحرمهم غذاءهم ودواءهم وأملهم فقط. شيطنتهم نزعت عنهم إنسانيتهم، تربي أطفالها على كرههم وجنودها على استهدافهم ومجتمعها على إنكار حقهم في الوجود. هذه هي العقائدية العنصرية اللائنسانية التي جعلت من جرائم الحرب ضد الشعب الفلسطيني في غزة والضفة الغربية المحتلين فعلا يفخر به جنود جيش الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي. هذه هي الكراهية التي حركت أرجل الجنود الإسرائيليين التي ركلوا بها جثامين شباب فلسطينيين من فوق السطوح في الضفة الغربية لتسقط أمتارا نحو الأرض ولتسقط ادعاءات أخلاقية قتلتهم. شيطنت الحكومة الإسرائيلية الفلسطينيين فمكنت إرهاب المستوطنين ضدهم وشرعنت سرقة أرضهم وطغت في سلب حقوقهم. حرب إسرائيل على غزة تبدي وحشي بهذه الكراهية، هي حرب تطهير عرقي إلغائية تستهدف محو الوجود الفلسطيني على الأرض الفلسطينية. دلائل ذلك في الدعوات العلنية لوزراء إسرائيليين حرق الفلسطينيين، في تأكيد رئيس الوزراء الإسرائيلي أنه لن يسمح أبدا بتلبية حق الشعب الفلسطيني في تقرير مصيره، وفي قرار الكنيسة الإسرائيلي منع تجسيد الدولة الفلسطينية. ودلائله في همجية العدوان على غزة، في السياسات والإجراءات الإسرائيلية غير القانونية واللا إنسانية التي سبقتها في كل الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة، مصادرة الأرض وبناء المستوطنات وحرق البيوت وحصار الاقتصاد والاعتداء على مقدسات القدس المحتلة الإسلامية والمسيحية ومحاولات تغيير هويتها العربية الإسلامية والمسيحية. زملاء الأعزاء، خلال عدوانها المستمر على غزة قتلت إسرائيل أكثر من 41,000 فلسطيني ودفنت تحت ركام البيوت أكثر من 10,000 طفل ورجل وامرأة، ومنعت عمن بقي منهم نازحا في الخيم وأطلال المدارس والمستشفيات الغذاء والماء والدواء ليموت الأطفال جوعا والأمهات عطشا والآباء قهرا. دمرت غزة لجعلها مكانا طاردا لأهلها غير قابل للحياة. وتنفذ الحكومة الإسرائيلية في الضفة الغربية المخططة ذاته، تدفعها إلى الانفجار لتبرر شن حرب جديدة تستهدف إلغاء الوجود الفلسطيني فيها ولتؤدي لتهجير أهلها منها. تلك جريمة حرب لن يسمح الأردن بها. لن نسمح بتهجير الشعب الفلسطيني من وطنه التاريخي إلى وطننا. قالها جلالة الملك عبد الله الثاني بن الحسين واضحة حازمة حاسمة: لن يكون الأردن وطنا بديلا، لن يحدث هذا أبدا. سنحمي الأردن وسنتصدى لأي تهديد لوطننا بكل ما أوتينا ومهما تطلب ذلك الواجب المقدس. للفلسطينيين وطنهم المحتل الذي سيتحرر دولة مستقلة ذات سيادة عاصمتها القدس المحتلة ولو بعد حين، والأردن لأهله سيبقى منيعا عصيا وللحق الفلسطيني الداعم والسند. دمرت إسرائيل غزة وتفجر الضفة الغربية وتستبيح لبنان وتدفع المنطقة نحو حرب شاملة لأن العالم سمح لها بذلك. تخرق الحكومة الإسرائيلية القانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني لأنها لا تواجه عواقب انتهاكها لهما. ترتكب جرائم الحرب لأنها لا تحاسب عليها. تتحدى مجلس الأمن وقرارات الجمعية العامة وأحكام محكمة العدل الدولية لأن القانون الدولي يطبق انتقائيا فجعلها ذلك فوقه. تهدد الأمن والسلم الدوليين لأن مجلس الأمن لا يقوم بدوره ولا يستخدم أدواته القانونية المتاحة للجمها. رأي محكمة العدل الدولية بين لا يقبل التأويل. الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأرض الفلسطينية غير قانوني. كل ما نتج عنه باطل. هذا الرأي يجب أن يستحيل واقعا تنفيذا للقانون الدولي وحماية لفرص تحقيق السلام. فالاحتلال هو الشر كله، هو سبب كل المآسي التي عاشتها وتعيشها المنطقة، هو الذي يدفعها نحو الهاوية، هو الخطر الأكبر. الزملاء الأعزاء، حكومة تجدر الكراهية والعنصرية في مجتمعها لا تريد السلام. والكراهية والعنصرية عدو المجبول عليهما كما هما خطر على ضحيتهما. تكذب هذه الحكومة الإسرائيلية على شعبها حين تدعي أنه محاط بمن يريد دماره. تهدد مستقبله حين تجعله أسير الخوف وتحاصره في ضيق الكراهية والعنصرية وتجعل من بلده دولة مارقة. فكل الدول العربية دانت قتل المدنيين الإسرائيليين، وكل الدول العربية تريد السلام العادل الذي قدمنا من أجل تحقيقه مبادرة شاملة تضمن أمن إسرائيل وقبولها في منطقتنا في إطار حل ينهي الاحتلال ويضمن حق الشعب الفلسطيني في الحرية والكرامة والحياة والدولة المستقلة ذات السيادة على ترابه الوطني. لكن الحكومة الإسرائيلية رفضت السلام، اختارت الحرب، قتلت من الأطفال ما لم تقتل أي حرب منذ عقود، فدخلت قائمة الأمم المتحدة السوداء لقتلة الأطفال، سجلت رقما قياسيا في قتل موظفي الأمم المتحدة وعاملي الإغاثة الإنسانية. ولأن المجرم يخشى الحقيقة قتلت الصحفيين ومنعت الإعلام الدولي من دخول غزة التي أحالتها ساحة أكبر جريمة حرب في التاريخ الحديث. ذاك أنه إذا دخل الإعلام الدولي غزة سيكتشف العالم حجم الموت والدمار والظلم والبؤس الذين سمح مجتمعنا الدولي لإسرائيل أن تلحق بأهل غزة. حينذاك سيرى العالم حجم العار الذي سيعيب إنسانيتنا لأجيال قادمة. جريمة أن يسمح لحكومة عقيدتها التطرف ومنهجها القتل أن تسرق مستقبل المنطقة. كفى، أوقفوا الظلم، افرضوا القوانين الدولية والقيم الإنسانية. كلكم تؤيدون قيام الدولة الفلسطينية على أساس حل الدولتين سبيلا لتحقيق السلام العادل. ترجموا اقتناعكم واقعا، اعترفوا بدولة فلسطين وضموها إلى الأمم المتحدة عضوا كاملا. كلكم ترفضون الكارثة الإنسانية التي يفاقمها العدوان الإسرائيلي على غزة. افرضوا إذن وقف استخدام التجويع سلاحا، اكسروا الحصار ولبوا دعوة جلالة الملك فرض جسر إنساني مستدام يوقف موت الفلسطينيين جوعا وعطشا ومرضا. خطر سقوط المنطقة في أتون حرب إقليمية حقيقي يتفاقم كل يوم. أوقفوا هذا الخطر قبل فوات الأوان. في جعبتكم من الأدوات القانونية والسياسية والعملانية ما يستطيع دحره. استخدموها، افرضوا العقوبات، أوقفوا تزويد إسرائيل السلاح، نفذوا قراراتكم السابقة. انقذوا الفلسطينيين والإسرائيليين من تطرف هذه الحكومة الإسرائيلية وظلاميتها وجرائمها، واحموا المنطقة والعالم من تبعات عدوانيتها التي لن تقف عند حدود الشرق الأوسط. الزملاء الأعزاء، قتلت إسرائيل عشرات الآلاف من الفلسطينيين، وتستطيع آلة حربها أن تقتل أكثر، لكنها لن تستطيع أن تقتل إرادة الشعب الفلسطيني في الحياة، ولن تستطيع وقف نضاله من أجل الحرية. سيظلون يدقون بابها جيلا بعد جيل. هذا هو التاريخ وهذا ما سيكون المستقبل. للشعب الفلسطيني حق يجب أن يناله إذا ما كان للمنطقة أن تنعم بحقها في الأمن والسلام. الزملاء الأعزاء، سيكسر نور الحق الفلسطيني عتمة الظلم الإسرائيلي، وستنتهي جولة الباطل الإسرائيلية عاجلا أم آجلا. اجعلوا ذلك عاجلا حتى لا يجعل القهر والظلم المستقبل كما الراهن دوامات صراع وقتل وبؤس وحروب. كفى، جاوز الظالمون المدى، أوقفوا هذا الظلم. شكرا لكم.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Safadi, for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Badr Ahmed Mohamed Abdelati, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Immigration, and Egyptian expatriates of Egypt.
السيدة الرئيس، نشكركم على عقد الاجتماع بطلب من الجزائر الشقيق لمناقشة التطورات الراهنة على ضوء الحرب والعدوان الغاشم المستمر على قطاع غزة والضفة الغربية وما تشهده الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة من عدوان ظالم. لقد جلسنا بينكم مرات عديدة منذ بداية الحرب على الشعب الفلسطيني بقطاع غزة، وناشدنا المجلس مرارا وتكرارا للتدخل بصورة مباشرة لوقف الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية الوحشية التي يعاني منها المدنيون في قطاع غزة منذ ما يقرب من العام، وإنهاء الحصار والتجويع لشعب أعزل وأطفال أبرياء حرموا من عائلاتهم وما زالوا يعانون من أخطار المجاعة والأمراض المعدية في ظل كارثة إنسانية مروعة صنعها الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الغاشم، والتي أودت بحياة أكثر من
unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe caused by the Israeli occupation. This is a situation in which resulted in 41,000 dead. Most are women and children. More than 100,000 people have been wounded. And there are those who are still buried under rubble. Even those who survive will continue to suffer difficulties for many years to come. The Israeli war and aggression machine has destroyed most of the buildings and infrastructure, civilian buildings and infrastructure, including hospitals and schools, systematically to make the Gaza Strip uninhabitable.
ورغم كل المناشدات الدولية لإسرائيل بوقف نزيف الدماء وإيقاف القتل المستمر واستهداف المدنيين، ورغم مساعي الوساطة المستمرة لمصر مع قطر والولايات المتحدة، ورغم قرارات مجلس الأمن العديدة، ورغم قرارات محكمة العدل الدولية، ورغم ما وصل إليه القطاع من وضع إنساني كارثي، أمعنت قوات الاحتلال في الانتقام من أهل غزة واستخدمت التجويع والحصار كسلاح ضد الفلسطينيين، وفرضت عليهم النزوح والتهجير من منازلهم، واحتلت الجانب الفلسطيني من معبر رفح، ومنعت وكالات الأمم المتحدة والمنظمات الإغاثية من توزيع المساعدات داخل القطاع، وتركت المدنيين بلا متاع ولا دواء ولا غذاء كافٍ وعلى مدار أشهر طويلة، بما أفضى لكارثة إنسانية طويلة.
medicines, and this has been ongoing for months, causing humanitarian catastrophe. Egypt, Madam President, and the group of Arab states reject the targeting of civilians. We reject violence against civilians, and yet we have seen that Israel has obstinately sought to carry out reprisals or to expand the conflict, and resulting in conflagration in the region with more and more civilians being imperiled. We condemn this, and this is unacceptable as a whole, and with all these specific features. We call upon the world and the Security Council to bring this to an end. This is logic and evident. The occupying power is the main direct responsible party for the situation which is currently taking place in Gaza, responsible for the destruction. The occupying power is responsible for the growing scale of the devastation and the conflict. The violence has spilled over from Gaza into the West Bank, and then in Lebanon, and hundreds of victims were claimed in Lebanon in one day, including women and children. Israel, like all states, has obligations to implement all United Nations Security Council resolutions and judgments from the ICJ adopted since the beginning of the conflict, an obligation to uphold the principles of IHL, humanitarian law, as well as the rules of war. We stress that these rules are being flouted brazenly, and Israel is enjoying complete impunity in this. This means that public opinion views the situation as an example of international hypocrisy, an example of double standards being applied. We reject the mendacious pretext for the ongoing war and aggression, and we reject the pretexts that have been laid out by the occupying power related to the measures adopted to alleviate humanitarian consequences insofar as these measures are not credible. The best proof of this is the widening starvation and a famine in Gaza, according to the UN report. The end to humanitarian assistance through the Rafah checkpoint is a direct consequence of Israeli military repeated attacks on the Gaza Strip, including the Palestinian side of that crossing point. We reject this, and we cautioned against this. This is collective punishment targeting the Palestinian people. And this is a situation which has rendered delivery of humanitarian assistance impossible, even suicidal. There are direct threats posed to humanitarian personnel. We extend our condolences to the families of the humanitarian workers who have been killed, including United Nations personnel, specifically those of UNRWA. The ongoing humanitarian operations will be possible if Israel shoulders its responsibility and immediately withdraws from the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing point, and if Israel submits to the control of the Palestinian Authority, and if it immediately opens up all other crossing points in Gaza on the Israeli side. Those who are familiar with Gaza know what the situation is. Israel understands the fallout of its operations, the consequences of settlement activity, the destruction of lands, land grabs, the forcible entry into cities in the West Bank on a day-to-day basis. These are policies which are geared towards extinguishing the dimming hope of a two-state solution being achieved. Egypt, Madam President, will continue to work towards a solution and to ensure the delivery of humanitarian assistance to the Gaza Strip in order to ensure that there be access for the delivery of this assistance. And this is on the basis of our duty before the fraternal Palestinian people so that they can resist on their territory, Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. And despite all attempts to expel these people, this is a red line for us, which we will not allow to be traversed. The international community has an obligation to adopt a clear stance in this regard without double standards and without delay. The Security Council can make a difference on the ground if there's political will, and if this is sincere. And lastly, I wish to turn to the role towards which we aspire, the role to be played by the Security Council through the leveraging of mechanisms which are at its disposal at this critical turning point in the Middle East. First and foremost, to compel Israel to accept a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, This is the best way to end the bloodletting, to end the aggression in Lebanon, and to immediately and fully withdraw from the Gaza Strip and the Philadelphia corridor, and on the Palestinian side, the Rafah crossing point, to facilitate humanitarian access, and the withdrawal from the Palestinian side from all the withdrawal by Israel from all checkpoints on the Palestinian side, and opening of these crossing points as a prelude to the opening of all Palestinian territory. Next, the implementation of all advisory opinions of the ICG. Third, to facilitate access and the control of the Palestinian Authority, and to ensure that they deliver upon all of its duties towards the Palestinian people, specifically in Gaza, as well as the delivery of vital services and management of law and order is included here. Next, for the Security Council to welcome Palestine's full-fledged membership at the United Nations on the basis of the 1967 borders, including East Jerusalem. This is an important issue, an urgent issue, if we to uphold the two-state solution and to uphold the question of international justice being delivered. To ensure that the credibility of the United Nations Security Council are maintained. This is what is at stake. Next, be it in Gaza or the West Bank and East Jerusalem, on the basis of a clearly defined timeline, there's a need for Israel to withdraw with a specific and clear measures being adopted in the event of delays according to the Charter of the United Nations. Madam President, we awaited for Israel to end final status negotiations for decades without any result, and you would agree now that it is past time for the Israeli government to embrace the two-state solution, to comply with the resolutions of the international community, in addition to official statements to uphold the establishment of a Palestinian state. We do not have a peace partner right now, and it is time to recognize the Palestinian state, an independent Palestinian state, to end the occupation which has gone on for decades. And the International Court of Justice has defined this as being unjust. Egypt will continue steadfastly to support peace efforts, which we hope to establish over the course of decades. Our hope is that the international community will, without delay, shoulder its responsibilities, and the Security Council will shoulder its responsibilities to establish a peace as is deserved by the people in the region. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Abdelati for his statement. I now give the floor to His Highness Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to thank the Republic of Slovenia for responding to the call of the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria for holding this session and for supporting the efforts of maintaining international peace and security that culminated clearly in your historic recognition of the state of Palestine. The Palestinian question remains the most important crisis that requires the attention of your august council as grave Israeli violations continue and as the humanitarian situation is deteriorating. We clearly see the dangerous implications of prolonging this crisis and widening the conflict through the latest military escalation in Lebanon. Since last October, there were 6 draft resolutions where the veto veto was used out of 10, and the resolutions that were adopted so far failed to achieve a ceasefire, failed to address the catastrophic humanitarian situation, and failed to pave the way for a credible political path towards peace. We wonder, what does the Council need to end the suffering, to implement international law? It is clear that there is a widening gap between international consensus and divides within the Council, which undermine its performance and outcomes. The General Assembly, in successive resolutions, reflected what our countries were calling for, the urgent need for a ceasefire, providing humanitarian assistance to the Strip without interruption, and the right of Palestinians to self-determination. We value the resolution of the GA that recognized the eligibility of Palestine for full membership at the UN, by virtue of which Palestine received additional privileges, as well as the latest resolution that called on Israel to end its occupation of the Palestinian territory. Achieving peace requires efforts from your Council. It requires courage, commitment to implementation, the legal and moral responsibility to end this crisis falls on the shoulder of your august Council. However, political divides undermined the talks of the Council and prevented the Council from shouldering its responsibility.
عندما ترفض إسرائيل حتى الاعتراف بمبدأ حل الدولتين وتستمر في الإجراءات الأحادية التي تقوض آفاق السلام. لذلك أقول لقد آن الأوان لإطلاق شراكة جادة من أجل السلام. ومن هنا أدعو أعضاء المجتمع الدولي وخاصة دول المجلس التي لم تعترف بعد بدولة فلسطين إلا المضي قدما بذلك دعما لحل الدولتين وحفاظا على فرص تحقيق التعايش والسلام المستدام. تؤمن المملكة بأن إنهاء الاحتلال وتنفيذ حل الدولتين هو الأساس لإيقاف دوامة العنف ورفع المعاناة وتحقيق الأمن والاستقرار في المنطقة. ولذلك فإننا أطلقنا مع شركائنا في اللجنة الوزارية العربية الإسلامية المشتركة ومملكة النرويج والاتحاد الأوروبي التحالف الدولي لتنفيذ حل الدولتين استشعارا منا بالمسؤولية المشتركة للعمل على تغيير واقع الصراع دون انتظار. في الختام تؤكد المملكة على تمسكها بإقامة الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة على أساس حدود عام 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية استجابة لحق الفلسطينيين الأصيل في تقرير الرئيس. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
In order for the Palestinians to achieve their inherent right to self-determination.
I thank His Highness Prince Al Saud for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hakan Fidan, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey.
Dear colleagues, I would like to thank at the outset Algeria for initiating this session. I also would like to thank my friend Ms. Tanja Fajon, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia, the chairperson in Office of Security Council, for opening this debate to the participation of countries outside the Council. Today, we are confronted with a blade-sharp turning point. Our trajectory will define the world we want to live in and the way nations interact. As I articulated yesterday at a different setting, our so valued rules-based order is in shambles. This erosion is getting irreversible with each passing day. Wisdom could have prevailed to stop this barbaric war in Gaza before it expands to the West Bank, Lebanon, and beyond. It is so puzzling that certain international actors, which have the leverages to alter this horrific course, decided deliberately to stay paralyzed, and they show no reflexes whatsoever to take conclusive action. What we need to do is so clear. There is a UN Security Council resolution setting out fundamentals of a deal. An immediate and permanent ceasefire must be secured. hostages, detainees exchange should take place. Israel must withdraw from Gaza. Humanitarian aid needs to give unhindered towards Palestinians that are in dire need to survive. We are all aware that Netanyahu has consistently evaded such a deal from unfolding. So much encouraged by the impunity granted, he will continue with his genocidal acts until the international community, especially the Security Council, puts real pressure on Israel to stop. I underline the Security Council's primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. The Council, regrettably, so far failed to make sure Israel implements its resolutions. No arms embargo, no coercive measures. With Israeli aggression unbounded, Lebanon on target, we are now in uncharted waters. All measures of international law and international humanitarian law have been sidelined, blindfolded. Intense bombing continues unabated without distinction of civilians and military targets. The Security Council should rise to its essential task. I urge all of you to stop this war and Israeli aggression. Only and only peace will ensure security of Israel, and peace will come only by two-state solution. Political or individual interests of Netanyahu and his fundamentalist partners should not endanger regional stability and international order. Let us pave the way for the two-state solution with an independent, sovereign, and contiguous Palestinian state based on the 1967 lines with each Jerusalem as its capital. Let us work all together for a just and lasting peace. This is our call to the Security Council. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Fidan, for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Bassam Sabag, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. سيد الرئيس، أدلي بهذا البيان باسم المجموعة العربية في الأمم المتحدة. أتوجه بالشكر لكم على عقد هذه الجلسة وللجزائر الشقيقة العضو العربي في مجلس الأمن على المبادرة لطلب عقدها. سيد الرئيس، منذ عام ونحن في هذا المجلس نكرر مطالبتنا المرة تلك والأخرى بضرورة تحرك مجلس الأمن واضطلاعه بمسؤولياته الأساسية التي أناطها به الدول الأعضاء بموجب الميثاق، ألا وهي صون السلم والأمن الدوليين اللذان يواجهان اليوم تهديدات خطيرة متصاعدة جراء عجز مجلس الأمن عن وضع قراراته موضع التطبيق لوقف الإبادة الجماعية التي ترتكبها إسرائيل بحق الشعب الفلسطيني مع ما يرافقها من عدوان على لبنان الشقيق واعتداءات متكررة على الأراضي السورية. إن من غير المقبول أن كل القرارات ذات الصلة التي اعتمدها المجلس على مدى الأشهر الماضية والتي لم يكن اعتمادها بالأمر اليسير جراء الدعم الذي تقدمه بعض الدول الأعضاء في المجلس لإسرائيل لم تجد طريقها إلى التنفيذ، لأن الغاية منها بالنسبة للبعض كانت مجرد تنفيس الاحتقان ومنح المزيد من الوقت لسلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لمواصلة جرائمها الوحشية.
and give more time to the occupying Israeli authorities
على بدء
to
العدوان
commit their
الإسرائيلي
barbaric
الهمجي على
crimes.
غزة
Almost
والذي
one
لم
full year
نشهد
has
له
elapsed
مثيلا
since the
منذ
barbaric
الحرب
Israeli
العالمية
aggression
الثانية.
against Gaza. This
والسؤال
aggression
الذي
is
يطرح هنا:
unparalleled and like
هل
nothing
اتسق
since the
أداء
Second World
مجلس
War.
الأمن مع المواقف التي عبرت عنها الغالبية
position
الساحقة من دولنا الأعضاء؟
is not in line with the
ردت
position
سلطات
expressed by the
الاحتلال على
overwhelming
هذا
majority of
السؤال
UN member
من
states.
خلال
The
مواصلتها
occupying
الإبادة
authorities
الجماعية
responded to what the Security Council
وجرائم
said
الحرب
by continuing their
والجرائم
genocide
ضد
and their war
الإنسانية
crimes as well as their
وارتكاب
crimes
أبشع
against
أشكال القتل
humanity. The
والتدمير بحق
worst
الشعب
massacres
الفلسطيني،
and destruction have
وأيضا
continued.
من خلال توسيع نطاق جرائمها
The occupying
لتشمل
authorities have
الضفة
also
الغربية.
expanded their crimes
خلال
and
الأشهر
they now
الماضية
include the West Bank.
عرضت المجموعة العربية وعدد كبير من ممثلي الأمم المتحدة ووكالاتها لآثار العدوان الإسرائيلي والجرائم التي ترتكبها قوات الاحتلال على مرأى من أعين العالم. اليوم نشهد تصعيدا للعدوان الإسرائيلي على لبنان الشقيق أسفر عن استشهاد مئات المدنيين الأبرياء وتدمير منازلهم ومصادر رزقهم ودفعهم إلى النزوح بمئات الآلاف. قبل بضع ساعات فقط استهدف كيان الاحتلال الإسرائيلي أبنية سكنية تضم مئات المدنيين الآمنين في الضاحية الجنوبية للعاصمة بيروت، وهو ما يضيف دليلا آخر على مدى وحشية هذا الكيان واستهتاره بالقانون الدولي. من جهة أخرى يواصل الكيان الإسرائيلي اعتداءاته المتكررة على الأراضي السورية، وآخرها استهداف منطقة الحدود السورية اللبنانية فجر هذا اليوم، وسبقه استهداف للنازحين المتواجدين على معبر حدودي بين سوريا ولبنان، وذلك بعد ساعات معدودة فقط من الاعتداء على منطقة يونين اللبنانية، والذي أدى إلى استشهاد 23 سوريا ممن يعيشون في لبنان جلهم من النساء والأطفال. السيد الرئيس، تجدد المجموعة العربية التأكيد على الطابع المركزي للقضية الفلسطينية وعلى دعمها المطلق لحقوق الشعب الفلسطيني غير القابلة للتصرف، بما فيها حقه في تقرير المصير وإقامة دولته المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس. تعرب المجموعة العربية عن إدانتها الشديدة لاستمرار العدوان الإسرائيلي على قطاع غزة وعلى دول المنطقة، والذي يشكل انتهاكا صارخا للقانون الدولي ولقرارات الأمم المتحدة ذات الصلة. وتحمل إسرائيل المسؤولية الكاملة عن جميع الخسائر الفادحة في الأرواح والمعاناة الإنسانية والأضرار المادية والدمار في الممتلكات والبنية التحتية. تؤكد المجموعة العربية على ضرورة التحرك الفوري قبل فوات الأوان، وتقدر في هذا السياق الجهود الحثيثة التي تبذلها جمهورية مصر العربية ودولة قطر من أجل التوصل إلى اتفاق لوقف إطلاق النار وتخفيف المعاناة الإنسانية في غزة. تدعم المجموعة العربية تنفيذ الرأي الاستشاري لمحكمة العدل الدولية بشأن عدم شرعية الاحتلال والاستيطان وضرورة إنهائه وتوسيع الاعتراف بدولة فلسطين ودعم حقها في العضوية الكاملة في الأمم المتحدة كما تشدد على ضرورة وضع القرار ذي الصلة الذي اعتمدته الجمعية العامة بتاريخ 18 أيلول موضع التنفيذ لإنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأراضي العربية. تدين المجموعة العربية بشدة إجراءات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الرامية لتقويض وكالة الأونروا واستهداف وقتل العاملين فيها أسوة بغيرهم من الطواقم الإنسانية، وتؤكد على ضرورة الحفاظ على ولاية الأونروا وعلى قدرتها على تقديم الدعم للاجئين الفلسطينيين على أراضيهم وفي الدول المضيفة. سيد الرئيس، تؤكد المجموعة العربية على تضامنها القوي مع لبنان الشقيق وشعبه وتطالب بوقف العدوان الإسرائيلي الغاشم على أراضيه ومساءلة سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي عن جرائمها، كما تطالب أيضا بوقف الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية على سوريا ومنع تكرارها. تحمل المجموعة العربية إسرائيل المسؤولية الكاملة عن انزلاق الأوضاع في المنطقة إلى حد يزج بها في حرب إقليمية شاملة تهدد السلم والأمن الدوليين. في الختام، تجدد المجموعة العربية التأكيد على أن الاحتلال الإسرائيلي كان ولا يزال السبب الأساسي لما تشهده المنطقة من عدم استقرار، وتطالب الأمم المتحدة بالتحرك العاجل لوضع قراراتها ذات الصلة موضع التنفيذ وإنهاء الاحتلال وضمان انسحاب إسرائيل من جميع الأراضي العربية التي تحتلها في فلسطين وسوريا ولبنان. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank you, Madam President. I thank His Excellency Mr. Sabak for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Saeed Abbas Araghchi, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, more than enough has been said about the horrors of ongoing genocide in Gaza, but not a single action is taken by the Security Council to stop it. Instead, the Israeli criminal mafia is rewarded, their crimes are justified, and their atrocities are normalized before our eyes. That's why Netanyahu and his companions have become so viciously emboldened to dream of repeating their carnage in Lebanon and of pushing the entire region into a full-scale war. It is very clear that they are counting on U.S. support in their sinister campaign of terror and destruction. Just this morning, Israeli regime used several 5,000-pound bunker busters that had been gifted to them by the United States to hit residential areas in Beirut. While the Israeli regime must be held accountable for the atrocity crimes they have been committing in occupied Palestine and Lebanon, one cannot disregard the U.S. complicity in their crime. I just remind the Council of a couple of facts. First, Israel's warmongering relies on U.S. military support and political backing. American weapons constitute the major part of Israeli weaponry, and ammunition used in Gaza, and therefore the United States is implicated in every aspect of Israel's atrocity. The vast majority of bombs Israel drops on Gaza are US-made. The US has sent so many arms to Israel since October 7 that the Pentagon has struggled to find sufficient cargo aircraft to deliver the material. If there is minimal honesty in US expression of concern over the loss of innocent Palestinian life in Gaza and Lebanon, it can simply deny Israel the tools it needs to commit crime. Mr. President, it is now more than a year of genocidal campaign in Gaza. More than 200,000 people have been slaughtered, wounded, or buried under the rubble. The whole Gaza Strip is leveled to the ground. Children and women have been deliberately mass murdered as part of Israel's deliberate whim to annihilate Palestine. The world has been watching with indignation and disgust, while the West has only been appeasing the culprit. Mr. President, the Council's credibility is shrinking every minute as it is prevented by Israel's major supporters from fulfilling its responsibility under the Charter. The Council must act now and stop Israel's cruel plan to exterminate an entire nation who have for 8 long decades been under brutal occupation and suppression. The Council's inaction is an invitation to more atrocity. The Council's members, and indeed the whole United Nations system, would be held responsible for every atrocity Israel commits in Gaza, in Lebanon, and elsewhere. Netanyahu and his criminal gang must have been arrested and prosecuted for the most heinous crimes, not to let him appear before this august body and take pride in his evil deeds. That's the historic shame that a high-profile killer dares to show up at the United Nations and poison the General Assembly with his disgusting lies and outrageous threats to invade other states and kill more people. He is illusional about the people in the region that he boasted about normalizing relations with Muslims by swimming through a sea of Palestinian and Lebanese blood. That's not going to happen for sure. As the Israeli campaign of death and destruction continues, the people in the region become more determined in their firmly held belief that Israel is a nasty outsider planted in our region as part of a colonial scheme to engage our region in unending cycle of wars and violence. We express our sympathy towards the people of Lebanon. The Islamic Republic of Iran will be on the side of Lebanon and resistance by all means. I thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Arakci for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Espen Barth Eide, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Norway.
Dear Tanya, dear members of the Security Council, I speak to you as a representative of the country that facilitated the Oslo Accords back in 1993. We have been committed to the cause of fostering good relations between Israel and Palestine and to prepare for the work of establishing a Palestinian state. We always thought that we would recognize the state of Palestine, but we thought until recently that the right moment of doing that was at the end of a process of voluntary negotiations, open-ended, between the two sides. When the Oslo Accords were agreed, the idea was to build the institutions of a Palestinian state, bottom up. That would begin with the practical elements of a state, while negotiations would go on the 4 clusters of outstanding issues that we all know so well. And it was people like Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres and Yasser Arafat and their teams who negotiated this, in my view, in very good faith, with a clear indication that they actually wanted to achieve this goal, which is why we thought, and I still think, given the information we had at the time, that the right thing to do was to build it bottom up so that these outstanding issues of borders and status of refugees and security, all these questions could be settled at the end. And at that time, we, and I believe all countries of the United Nations, would recognize the state of Palestine. Well, at some point we realized that there was no progress in these talks, that not much happened. And I have been in and out of this job, and I've had the opportunity, both now and previously, to chair the HLC, the ad hoc committee, for the donor committee for Palestine, which has been ad hoc for 31 years, which is a long interpretation of ad hoc. And we had a meeting yesterday, by the way, which was very constructive, and Prime Minister Mustafa gave a very good report of what he has done and his government has done since they came into our office some months ago, and also plans that were very broadly applauded by the donors, including the European Union and the United States of America, which are my co-chairs in that role. The problem was, in many of the years that we were doing this work, that we were wondering whether we were part of the solution or part of the problem. On a good day, part of the solution, because we were building the quintessential institution that is necessary if you want to have a state. And we have seen, and this council knows this more than most, sometimes we recognize states without really having the interior in place. So the idea was that when the state was in place, it was really firmly built to be able to cooperate with Israel in a constructive manner, but also to provide the key services and provide for the aspirations of the Palestinian people. But on a bad day, we were thinking maybe we were a part of the problem, because we were just creating what some people saw as a process and what some people saw as status quo, as a kind of status in itself. And of course, the process is good if it leads to something, but it can be quite harmful if it does not lead to anything. So at some point, we realized that we could not go on eternally. We had to change gears. And what has happened now, I'm not going to repeat what so many people have said of the immense atrocities and the violence and the death and destruction which has been bestowed upon the people of Israel, the people of Palestine, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, and now also in Lebanon, and the fear of many countries that it will expand into other countries in the region, that even some of the peace accords that were acquired decades ago could now be in trouble. So out of that, we realized that we had to change gears. And together with precisely Slovenia, and I applaud you for your very good work here as president of the Council, and Spain and Ireland, and we added ourselves to the already long list of countries that have recognized Palestine, 149 right now. That leaves 44 states of the 193 members of the UN. And what we did yesterday, as was mentioned by the Foreign Minister of His Highness the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia, we launched what we call the Global Alliance for the implementation of a Palestinian state and a two-state solution, which brings together a number of countries that believe that we have to change gears and accelerate this work now, and that we have to see how we can come out of this deadlock and try to use this deep crisis also as an opportunity to move forward. So I urge, and the contact group that establishes this group urge all countries to contribute to the universal recognition of the Palestinian state and its UN membership, as we have done, Slovenia and my country and many others, to strengthen the institutions of the state of Palestine so that they are ready to live up to the expectations of their people in the West Bank, but also to prepare for their return to Gaza. Because we want one Palestine, not different Palestines. We want that Palestine which came out of the Oslo Accords, which means that it's the institutions that we know as the State of Palestine, which are the embryonic institutions of what finally will be the real existing universally recognized State of Palestine. But also, as was mentioned in the intervention of Saudi Arabia, that this also would be anchored in a broader regional setting of normalization, where many countries in the region would be ready to provide for the security guarantees of Israelis and Palestinians alike. This is an updated vision based on the Arab peace formula that was launched many years ago, but adapted to today's realities. Many speakers have invoked the ICJ decision of July this year, which very clearly points out in its legal language that the occupation is illegal, that it amounts to annexation, and that it has to come to an end. And the vast majority of the members of the General Assembly confirmed that position in its resolution last week, which, by the way, was the first resolution ever proposed by the Palestinian delegation and supported by many others, including my own country. In that context, I want to share with the Council the following observation. Of course, Israel has to be part of how this is finally settled. But it does not any longer make sense that if you're illegally occupying other people's lands, you have an absolute eternal veto on everything that is going to happen in that area. It does not fit with international law. It does not fit with the vast majority, how we see it, the vast majority of people on the planet. This has to change. Towards the end, Madam President, I want to say to Israel, and I'm happy to sit beside Israel because we have no problem with diplomacy. We think that when we disagree, we do better speaking to each other than to cancel each other. So I'm happily sitting right here, and I want to say to our friends from Israel, Norway was an enthusiastic supporter of the establishment of the Jewish homeland of Israel, and we still is. We want Israelis to thrive and prosper safely, security, without terrorism, without fears to their life in Israel. But we have exactly the same love for the Palestinian people. We want the Palestinian people to thrive and prosper and live securely and safely in Palestine. And we do believe that the people of Israel and the people of Palestine are much more likely to do that if there is a two-state solution. And we think that this is exactly the moment to arrive at the two-state solution, which is why we believe that this is the moment to move forward, think outside the box, and to try to move towards a real progress on this field. And I want to remind the Council that it is bestowed in the Council on the Council to be the primary source of upholding international security, international law, in accordance with the UN principles, in accordance with the UN Charter. And as the Secretary General told us on the opening of this session of the GA, international law is in trouble. It's in trouble, serious trouble in Ukraine, it's serious trouble in the Middle East and so many other places. This is an excellent opportunity to turn a very deep, alarmingly dangerous crisis into a major opportunity, and it's time to implement a Palestinian state so that we can implement a two-state solution. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Wright, for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Josep Borrell Fontelles, High Representatives of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and Vice President of the European Commission.
Thank you, Ms. President. Everybody knows the figures. Since the start of the war, about 42,000 Palestinians have been killed, maybe more below the rubble of Gaza. Most of them are innocent civilians, including over 11,000 children. And this after 1,200 Israelis were killed and hundreds taken hostages. Many of them still are being kept in captivity, while Gaza has been reduced to rubble, a place where life is no longer possible. This week I met families of hostages. I already did during my last visit to Israel, and I see their agony. And 2 weeks ago I was in the border of Gaza. I heard the bombing behind me, and I saw large supplies of humanitarian aid which could be life-saving, but are not allowed to enter into Gaza. And it's difficult for me to add anything to what Commissioner General Lazzarini of UNRWA said yesterday. Gaza is a place that horrifies even the most seasoned humanitarians. And I want to use this opportunity to pay tribute to UNRWA, of which 222 staff members have been killed. The European Union keeps calling for an immediate ceasefire, unconditional release of all hostages, unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid, which is really needed. And we support the US, Qatar, and Egypt in their ongoing efforts. It has already been said, escalation in the region is driving it into the abyss of a full-blown war across the blue line and in the region. While we are talking, bombs are again falling in Beirut, and civilians are paying an unbearable price. The Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union, which I am proud to represent here, supports the French and American efforts for an urgent ceasefire in Lebanon and implementing the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 by your parties. It is essential, but allow me to remind that this resolution was adopted 20 years ago, and we are still asking for it to be implemented. Also in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, it's about to fall off a cliff. And we continue condemning violence. The European Union continues condemning violence, all kinds of terrorism and settlement expansion. We have adopted sanctions on terrorist organizations such as Hamas, but also on some of the extremist settlers. And as many have said, sorry, but West Bank is becoming another Gaza. And you can see the videos of bulldozers destroying roads, destroying water supply systems, destroying sewerage, all that in the name of fighting against terrorism, of course. Israelis, Palestinians, Lebanese, and all people deserve security and the protection of international law. All. For Israel's sake, as well as for the Palestinians, we need a strong, legitimate, and effective Palestinian Authority. Therefore, we support its reform, and on that basis, we provide emergency support worth 400 million euros, and we will work with key partners on further support. Finally, it is vital not to just focus on the many crises of today, but as my Norwegian friend has said, we have to work to resolve this underlying conflict. Therefore, yesterday, we co-hosted a high-level event with the Arab League, and I want to thank to everyone who made this event possible, and the OIC contact group and Norway, thank you very much to Norway, open to all United Nations members, all, no exclusion. Some decided not to go, but many did. It was a big event, a constructive and positive event. Under the chairmanship of Prince Faisal of Saudi Arabia, we launched this global alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution. Well, in fact, for the implementation of the Palestinian state, because the other state has already been implemented. And under its umbrella, all states and international organizations can bring together the practical measures to bring about a free Palestine next to a secure Israel. And I want to stress it. We want the security of Israel. We, Europeans, we ask for a free Palestine next to a secure Israel. Taking responsibility means that we must not only say what we oppose. I don't want this solution. Okay, then what is your solution? If you don't want the two-state solution, which is the solution? Someone knows a better one that can be explained and implemented? We have to act if we want to achieve. We will do this work with the whole world, quickly, because every day costs lives. But in the end, it is up to Israelis and Palestinians to make their own peace. And I know that both people experience this conflict as an existential one. Both fear the other want to destroy them. The Israelis fear to be thrown to the sea, and the Palestinians to be thrown to the desert. Extremist forces do their worst to fan the hate that killed Rabin. The hate that killed Rabin, and the same voices that were pushing for killing Rabin now are being heard again. So all of us must help the societies to speak each other. Understanding the suffering of the other is certainly the most difficult challenge and the most difficult thing to be done by people in conflict. But it has to be done. And we Europeans, we can maybe to present an example of this has been done. Let nobody say that this is not the time for the two-state solution. When was the right time? When will be the right time? How many more people has to die before it is the right time? The Palestinians are a people that refuse to die. Le peuple palestinien est un peuple qui ne veut pas mourir en tant que peuple. And there is nothing more absurd than anti-Semitism. There is nothing more absurd than to hate and to kill a human being because he belongs to another group, another ethnic, or professes another religion. And anti-Semitism has brought the humanity to the worst crimes. So please, don't let this word to be banalized. We refuse any anti-Semitic approach to this problem. And on this basis, it's time to act. It's time to act. Let's go to work. The bombs continue falling. We are living in a world done of resolutions, meetings, speeches. Out of this room, the real world is made of war, people being killed, misery, hate. Let's make this world to approach the real world, and let's make our word to have the capacity to change it. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Borrell Fonteles for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers, so this meeting is adjourned.